Go ahead and get comfortable. Pull the blanket up, turn the lights down low, because for the next 4 hours, we are going to Springfield. And the version of Springfield we are visiting tonight is not the one you remember from Sunday evenings as a kid. It is darker than that. It is stranger than that. And by the time we are done, the show you thought you knew will look entirely different. The Simpsons has been on television since the 17th of December 1989, 36 seasons, nearly 800 episodes. It is the longest-running animated series in American television history, the longest-running scripted primetime show, and one of the most watched pieces of media the world has ever produced. Billions of people across dozens of countries have sat down with this family. They know Homer's voice the way they know the voice of a relative. They know the layout of the house on Evergreen Terrace the way they know the layout of their own childhood home. And underneath all of that familiarity, underneath 36 years of jokes and couch gags and guest stars and cultural references, there is something else. There are patterns that run through the entire series like fault lines running through bedrock. There are buried storylines that were introduced and quietly abandoned. There are fan theories so carefully constructed, so densely supported by things the show actually put on screen, that the people who make The Simpsons have been forced to address them publicly, and their denials have often raised more questions than they answered. Tonight we are going through all of it. Every major theory, every dark truth, every mystery the show has been carrying for 3.5 decades. We are going to move slowly and carefully through each one, because the details matter, and the details are where this show hides everything worth finding. So, settle in. Close your eyes if you like. Let the words wash over you, because Springfield is waiting. And what we find there tonight might just change the way you watch the show forever. Section 1. The nuclear heart of Springfield. There is a building at the edge of Springfield that dominates the skyline the way a cathedral dominates a medieval town. Its cooling towers rise above every other structure in the area. Its smokestacks release a pale, faintly luminescent vapor into the air at all hours of the day and night. It employs a significant portion of the town's adult population. It powers every light, every appliance, every piece of machinery in every home within its service area. Without it, Springfield as a functioning community would cease to exist within days. It is, of course, the Springfield nuclear power plant, and it has been poisoning every living thing in Springfield for as long as anyone can remember. Now, before we go any further, let us be clear about something. This is not a loose reading of the show. This is not a fan theory built on circumstantial evidence and wishful thinking. The case that the Springfield nuclear power plant is actively contaminating the town, and everyone in it is supported by decades of canonical evidence drawn directly from the episodes themselves. The show has been telling you this story from the very beginning. It has just been telling it so casually, so embedded in the fabric of weekly comedy, that the audience has largely accepted it the same way the residents of Springfield accept it, which is to say, without question. Let us start with what the show has actually established about the plant itself. The Springfield nuclear power plant is a 2-unit pressurized water reactor facility. It is owned entirely by Charles Montgomery Burns, a man whose age the show places somewhere between 100 and 140 years old, depending on which episode you are watching. Burns has owned this facility for decades. He is the sole authority over its operations, its maintenance, its staffing, and its safety protocols. There is no board of directors with meaningful oversight. There is no regulatory body with real teeth. There is Burns, and there is the plant. And the relationship between the two of them is essentially feudal. When the plant underwent a surprise safety inspection, the inspectors found 342 violations, 342 separate instances where the facility was operating in a manner inconsistent with federal safety standards. The estimated cost to bring the plant up to code was $56 million. Charles Montgomery Burns, a man who is canonically a billionaire many times over, a man who has stolen a $1 trillion bill from the United States government and hidden it for decades, refused to spend that money. He did not refuse because he could not afford it. He refused because spending it would mean acknowledging that the violations existed. And acknowledging the violations would mean someone might start asking what those violations had already done. What those violations had already done is the question this entire section is about. The specific nature of the violations the show depicts is worth sitting with, because they are not minor. We are not talking about paperwork that was filed incorrectly, or a fire extinguisher that was not up to date on its inspection. The show depicts radioactive waste being pumped directly into bodies of water. It shows radioactive material being dumped onto children's playgrounds. It shows a piece of plutonium being used as a paperweight on someone's desk. It shows cooling towers with cracks in the structure that were repaired not with engineering materials but with chewing gum, a single wad of chewing gum pressed into a fissure in a pressurized nuclear containment structure. It shows luminous rats living in the facility's infrastructure, rats that glow with the same faint light that the cooling towers exhaust into the night air. And then, perhaps most unsettling of all, it shows human skeletons in the basement. Human skeletons. In the basement of an active nuclear power plant. The show displays them and then moves on. No explanation is offered for who those people were. No investigation follows. No character asks how human remains ended up in the subterranean level of a commercial nuclear facility. They are simply there, and Springfield looks at them, and Springfield shrugs, and the episode continues. The man responsible for preventing all of this from being worse is Homer Simpson. Homer is the safety inspector for Sector 7G, and he has been the safety inspector for Sector 7G for the entirety of his adult working life. The show's own creator has stated that Homer has an IQ of 55. 55. In the episode where a doctor removes a crayon from Homer's brain, a crayon that has been lodged there since his childhood, his intelligence immediately climbs to what the show describes as genius level. Without the crayon, Homer is brilliant. With it, he is functionally impaired in ways that the show depicts as both comedic and, on closer examination, genuinely alarming. He sleeps at his workstation. He eats donuts during meltdown warnings. He has, at various points, caused nuclear incident through a combination of inattention and poor judgment so profound it nearly defies description. In one episode, he throws a donut into the reactor core to see what happens. That is the person standing between Springfield and a radiological catastrophe. Now, here is where the evidence starts to accumulate in ways that are very difficult to dismiss. The first visible mutation in Springfield appears in the show's second season. His name is Blinky. He is a fish. He has 3 eyes. Blinky is pulled from a river near the power plant, and when he is discovered, he becomes national news within the show's universe. A candidate for governor uses Blinky as evidence that Burns's facility is contaminating the local waterways. Burns is pressured into eating the fish on live television to demonstrate that it is harmless. He does. The town watches, and then the town moves on. Nobody conducts a follow-up study. Nobody tests the river. Nobody looks at a 3-eyed fish and asks the obvious question, which is, if the fish in the water near the power plant have developed an additional eye, what is happening to the people who are drinking water from the same source? The show answers this question. It just answers it slowly, across seasons, and in a way that it presents as background detail rather than revelation. In the Season 8 episode called The Springfield Files, Homer encounters something in the woods near Springfield at night. He describes it as an alien. It glows with a greenish light. It moves with an unsteady, shuffling gait. It seems barely aware of its surroundings, drifting through the trees in a state that Homer can only interpret as otherworldly. The episode builds toward a dramatic reveal. FBI agents are called in, the town organizes watch parties, and when the truth finally comes out, the alien is not an alien at all. It is Mr. Burns. Burns has been undergoing a weekly medical treatment so intensive, so loaded with synthesized chemicals and controlled radiation exposure, that the procedure causes his body to emit a visible green glow in the hours following each session. The treatment keeps him alive for exactly 7 more days. Without the next dose, he dies. He requires this treatment on a precise weekly schedule to sustain his biological functions, and after each session, he wanders out of the facility in a dazed, euphoric state, stumbling through the dark forest near Springfield like something that barely resembles a human being anymore. The people of Springfield see this glowing figure in the woods, and their first assumption is not radiation. Their first assumption is not the power plant that dominates their skyline. Their first assumption is extraterrestrial life. That is how thoroughly the contamination has done its work. But the Simpsons movie makes the case in the most direct terms the franchise has ever used. In the film, Springfield's environmental contamination reaches a point that the Environmental Protection Agency, the actual federal regulatory body, determines is beyond any reasonable remediation. The EPA solution is not a cleanup. It is not a shutdown. It is not a fine or an enforcement action. The solution the United States government arrives at is physical containment. They seal Springfield under a massive glass dome and cut it off from the rest of the country entirely. Think about what that actually means. The federal government of the United States looked at Springfield and decided that the town itself, the air, the water, the soil, the entire physical environment, was so saturated with contamination that the only responsible course of action was to prevent it from spreading to anywhere else. Springfield was not identified as a town with a pollution problem. Springfield was identified as a contamination zone, and every single resident who was alive when the dome went up was inside it when the seal was completed. Now look at the residents themselves with this in mind. Homer Simpson has a massive overbite, bulging eyes, 4 fingers on each hand instead of 5, a skull shape that does not correspond to any standard human cranial structure, and an IQ that sits at the clinical threshold for intellectual disability. He has also survived being shot, being electrocuted, falling off multiple cliffs, being struck by cars on more than one occasion, surviving explosions at close range, and absorbing physical damage that by any reasonable medical standard should have ended his life many times over. His healing rate is extraordinary. His pain tolerance is completely inhuman. He has worked inside the nuclear facility in direct proximity to an active reactor core for the entirety of his adult career. Marge Simpson has the same bulging eyes, the same 4 fingers, and hair that has maintained an identical shape for 36 years without any visible maintenance. A tower of blue that defies gravity and does not move, regardless of what physical situations Marge finds herself in. Marge worked at the nuclear power plant herself for a period. She was exposed to the same facility, the same violations, the same leaking radiation. Their 3 children, Bart, Lisa, and Maggie, were all born after both parents had already been living in Springfield's contaminated environment for years. All 3 display physical characteristics that do not occur in any normal human population. The spiky hair that holds its shape without product, the overbites, the bulging eyes, the yellow skin. The yellow skin is the detail that makes the whole theory click into place. Every single resident of Springfield is yellow. Every one. The skin tone of Springfield's population is a flat, uniform yellow that corresponds to no naturally occurring human skin pigmentation anywhere on Earth. It is not a tan. It is not a light complexion. It is yellow, a specific shade that covers every man, woman, and child in the town from birth. But here is the detail that separates this from simple animation style. When celebrities visit Springfield in the show, when guest characters arrive from outside the town, they look different. Their proportions are more natural, their eyes are more normally sized and shaped, their features correspond more closely to actual human anatomy. The show draws outsiders with recognizably different visual proportions than it draws Springfield residents. The standard explanation, the one that has been accepted for decades without much scrutiny, is that this is simply the art style. It is just how The Simpsons looks. People have 5 fingers and more realistic proportions because they are drawn that way for contrast. But within the logic of the show's own universe, the logic that presents itself as a consistent internal reality, there is a visible and observable difference between people who live in Springfield and people who do not. The people inside the contamination zone look one way. The people outside it look another way, and the show has been showing you this difference for 36 years while asking you to accept it as an aesthetic choice. Even the animals in Springfield follow the same pattern. Santa's little helper, the Simpson family dog, has the same bulging eyes as his owners, the same deviation from normal canine anatomy. Blinky the fish has 3 eyes. The local wildlife is demonstrably affected by the power plant's runoff, and the show is explicit about this. It shows you a 3-eyed fish. It tells you directly that this is what the radiation is doing to living organisms in the waterways near the plant. And then it invites you to conclude that somehow the exact same radiation has had no effect whatsoever on the humans living in the same environment and drinking the same water. Burns knows. He has always known. The show makes this explicit in ways that are easy to miss because they are spread across so many years of episodes. Burns funds private medical research. He employs personal physicians. He undergoes those weekly treatments that are explicitly described as keeping him alive through what amounts to chronic managed radiation exposure. He understands the biological effects of radiation exposure better than anyone in Springfield, because he is personally dependent on managing those effects in his own body. He has the resources to synthesize experimental treatments that are decades ahead of anything available through conventional medicine. He has spent a century learning, through first-hand experience, what radiation does to biological systems at the cellular level. And he has been running a facility that has been exposing Springfield's entire population to uncontrolled radiation for decades. The pattern of Homer's employment makes more sense when you understand this. When German investors briefly purchased the power plant, the first thing they did was evaluate the staff. Homer was immediately identified as incompetent and fired. The investors then commissioned an assessment of what it would cost to bring the facility up to regulatory standards, and the estimated figure nearly bankrupted them. They sold the plant back to Burns as quickly as they could, and Burns, upon reacquiring the facility, immediately rehired Homer. A competent safety inspector would have shut the plant down within a week. Homer ensures that the violations continue to be overlooked. The radiation keeps leaking, the water stays contaminated, and Burns maintains his monopoly over Springfield's power supply, its economy, and, by extension, the cognitive capacity of the population that depends on both. There is one more thread in this section that deserves careful attention. It concerns the crayon. In Season 12, Homer discovers that he can have the crayon removed from his brain. He undergoes the procedure. His IQ climbs immediately to a level that the show suggests is genuinely extraordinary. Homer becomes articulate and perceptive. He is able to understand complex systems, to see through deception, to recognize patterns that had previously been invisible to him. He becomes, in effect, the person he would have been if the crayon had never been there in the first place. And it makes him miserable. He sees Springfield with clear eyes for the first time, and what he sees is unbearable. His job is revealed to him in its true nature. His circumstances are revealed to him in their full weight. The gap between the world as it is and the world as it should be becomes impossible to ignore, and Homer cannot live inside that gap. So he has the crayon put back. He chooses to return to the fog. He chooses impairment over clarity because clarity, in Springfield, is the most painful thing a person can experience. But the show never asks a question that sits just underneath this storyline, quiet and persistent. How did the crayon get there in the first place? Homer had the object in his brain from childhood. He went through his entire life, visiting doctors, receiving checkups, interacting with Springfield's medical establishment, and not a single physician ever found a foreign object lodged in his skull. Either every doctor in Springfield is so comprehensively incompetent that they cannot detect a crayon in a patient's head through any standard examination, or the medical establishment in Springfield is compromised. If Burns's influence extends into the healthcare infrastructure of the town he essentially owns, if the doctors are looking the other way while radiation does its work on their patient's neurological tissue, then Homer's crayon is not just a physical anomaly. It becomes a metaphor for something the show is trying to communicate without being able to say it plainly. The people of Springfield have something wrong with their brains, something that keeps them compliant, something that prevents them from looking up at those cracked cooling towers and asking why things are the way they are. The radiation theory does not explain one isolated mystery about the Simpsons. It explains all of them simultaneously, from a single source. The characters do not age because their mutated biology has been altered at the cellular level. The town resets after catastrophic events because the population's memory and critical thinking have been compromised by chronic neurological damage. Homer survives injuries that should kill him because his body has developed adaptations that make him extraordinarily durable, while simultaneously devastating his cognitive function. Burns stays alive through treatments that would destroy anyone without his resources because he has been managing his own radiation exposure for over a century with methods that nobody else in town has access to. And nobody in Springfield questions any of this. Not because they are stupid, exactly, but because the thing that would allow them to ask the right questions, the unimpaired neurological machinery of critical thought, has been quietly, steadily, invisibly eroded by the same water that comes out of their taps every morning. Springfield is not a quirky, animated town. It is a contamination zone. The residents are not eccentric characters in a long-running comedy. They are symptomatic, And the nuclear power plant that provides their electricity, employs their neighbors, and poisons their groundwater is not a background element of the show's visual landscape. It is the cause. It has always been the cause. Every yellow face, every bulging eye, every impossible recovery from a fatal injury, every forgotten catastrophe, every reset, every unexplained mystery in 36 years of episodes traces back to the same cracked cooling tower, leaking the same invisible contamination into the same water supply, quietly reshaping the same population that cannot figure out why their fish have 3 eyes and their children have 4 fingers. The Springfield nuclear power plant is not just part of the show. In a very real sense, it is the show. It is the engine underneath everything. And nobody in Springfield will ever figure that out, because the plant already made sure they cannot. If you are still awake and finding this interesting, drop a comment letting us know what time it is where you are and where in the world you are watching from. And if you want more of this kind of deep dive, go ahead and subscribe. Now let us keep going, because we are just getting started. Section 2. Homer's Coma and the Dream That Never Ended. What if everything we just discussed, the radiation, the mutations, the contamination, the impossible town and its impossible residents, what if all of that is real, but only inside the mind of a man who has been lying unconscious in a hospital bed since April of 1993? This is the Homer coma theory. It is the single most widely discussed, most elaborately argued, and most internally consistent fan theory in the history of The Simpsons. It has been debated on forums for 2 decades. It has been addressed by the show's executive producers. It has been referenced within the show itself. And it has never been fully disproven, because the evidence for it is not external to the show. It is baked into the structure of the episodes themselves. Let us go back to the beginning of it, to the episode where the theory says everything changed. On the 1st of April 1993, the 18th episode of the show's 4th season aired. The episode was called So It's Come to This, a Simpsons clip show. The premise was straightforward. It was April Fool's Day, and Bart had been playing escalating pranks on Homer throughout the episode, each one larger and more elaborate than the last. The final prank involved Bart taking one of Homer's beer cans to an auto body shop and placing it inside an industrial paint shaker. When Homer opened the can, the resulting explosion was violent enough to send him to the hospital. While Homer was lying in his hospital bed recovering, he noticed a vending machine across the room. He attempted to obtain a candy bar. The vending machine tipped over. It landed on Homer, and Homer Simpson flatlined. He entered a clinically unconscious state, a coma. A real one, established by the episode as a genuine medical event with genuine medical consequences. It was not played as a dream sequence or a cutaway gag. Homer's heart stopped, and he went under, and the show treated this as a serious narrative event. The episode ends with Homer waking up. Bart tearfully confesses at his bedside that the escalating prank was his fault. Homer springs awake and immediately tries to strangle his son. The family laughs. The credits roll. Everything returns to normal. But the episode includes one final detail that the show drops almost as an afterthought and then never addresses again. Before the laughter, before the strangling, before the credits, the doctors inform Homer that during the coma he lost 5% of his brain function. 5%, gone permanently, irreversibly destroyed. And Homer's response to learning that he has suffered permanent neurological damage is to laugh, even though, in the same breath, he admits that he does not understand why he is laughing. The show finds this charming. The family finds this charming. Nobody finds it alarming. And then The Simpsons continues for 32 more years, as if nothing happened. Unless nothing did happen. Unless Homer never actually woke up at all. The Homer coma theory, in its most complete form, proposes that Homer Simpson did not wake up from that coma in April of 1993. Every single episode that has aired since that date, everything that has happened in Springfield in 3 decades of television, is a dream being generated by the unconscious mind of a man lying in a hospital bed in Springfield General, slowly losing brain function while his family sits beside him and waits. The evidence for this is genuinely unsettling when you walk through it carefully. The first piece of evidence is tonal, and it is the most broadly observable one. Before the coma episode, The Simpsons was a specific kind of show. It was grounded in a way that television writers in the 1990s would have called realistic. Not in the sense that it was documentary, it was always a cartoon, but in the sense that its storylines dealt with recognizable human experiences. Homer tries to give up drinking and finds it harder than he expected. Marge develops feelings for another man and has to reckon with the state of her marriage. Lisa forms an intense attachment to a substitute teacher and has to process the grief of losing a mentor. Bart is told he might be held back a year and has to confront the real possibility of academic failure. These are the kinds of situations that real families navigate. The emotional stakes are domestic and familiar. The comedy comes from recognizing yourself in the characters, not from the sheer impossibility of the events. After the coma episode, everything shifts. The shift is not subtle. It is enormous, and it happens quickly, and it is never reversed. Homer goes to space. He befriends a large number of celebrities under circumstances that have no plausible explanation. He joins a secret society that turns out to be genuinely powerful. He discovers that his mother is alive and has been living underground as a fugitive radical. He meets God, not metaphorically but literally, face to face, twice. He becomes the leader of a vigilante group. He holds hundreds of different jobs across different industries in ways that the show does not even try to explain continuity-wise. He travels to dozens of different countries. He survives physical trauma on a recurring basis that would kill any normal human being many times over. The show transforms, in other words, from a family sitcom grounded in economic anxiety and domestic realism into something that operates on entirely different rules. The show's own fan base has been arguing about when this shift happened and what caused it for 20 years. The internet has entire ecosystems of debate dedicated to identifying the season where The Simpsons lost its way, where the writing became too broad or too absurd or too disconnected from the emotional core that made the early seasons work. The coma theory argues that the answer is not a decline in writing quality. The coma theory argues that the answer is biological. Homer's dreaming brain, slowly deteriorating from the moment the vending machine landed on him, generates increasingly surreal and disconnected narratives as the years pass and the neurological damage accumulates. The early seasons after the coma are still fairly coherent because the damage is recent and the dream has not yet fully destabilized. But as the decades pass, as Homer's brain function continues to erode, the dreams become wilder, more disconnected from internal logic, more flooded with celebrity appearances and physical impossibilities and storylines that contradict or ignore everything that came before them. The show did not get bad. Homer's brain got worse. And the difference between those two explanations is the difference between a writing staff losing its way and a dying man losing his grip on the world he is trying to hold together in his sleep. Here is the piece of evidence from the show itself that the coma theorists point to most often because it is remarkable in its specificity. 6 months before the coma episode, in the 4th season premiere titled Homer the Heretic, Homer has a conversation with God. An actual conversation. God appears to Homer and they speak at length. During this conversation, God tells Homer that he will learn the meaning of life, but that it is not yet time. God tells Homer that his time is coming. 6 months later, Homer is in a coma. The timeline is exact. God told Homer that his time was approaching, that the period of his waking life was drawing towards something significant. And 6 months after that divine warning, Homer's conscious experience of reality ended. What the show presents as a quirky theological gag, a bit of whimsy about Homer having a casual chat with the Almighty, reads under the coma theory as a prophecy. God was telling Homer that his waking life was almost over, that everything that followed would be the dream of a man who had slipped beneath the surface of consciousness and could not find his way back. The aging problem is the place where the coma theory does something no other explanation has ever managed. It answers the question more elegantly and more completely than any alternative. Nobody in Springfield ages. Bart has been 10 years old for 36 years. Lisa has been 8. Maggie has been 1. Homer and Marge have not gained a wrinkle or a gray hair across 3.5 decades of television. The show uses what television writers call a floating timeline, meaning the present is always the viewer's present. The technology and cultural references update with each passing year, but the characters remain frozen at their original ages forever. Other animated shows do this too. The Flintstones did it. Family Guy does it. The explanation that the industry gives is that this is simply how long-running animated series work. The characters do not age because aging would eventually end the show, and so the convention of suspended time is accepted as a storytelling necessity. But The Simpsons has been running long enough, and the evidence for the coma theory is specific enough that the simple industry explanation starts to feel insufficient. The coma theory offers a different answer. Nobody ages because the people in Springfield exist inside the frozen mind of an unconscious man. Homer went to sleep in April of 1993, and at that moment his brain captured a snapshot of his family, a photograph of the people he loved exactly as they were on the day he lost consciousness. His children cannot age in the dream because Homer was not there to watch them age. His wife cannot change because the last time he saw her, she looked exactly like she did in that hospital room. His friends cannot develop or evolve because his memory of them is locked at the moment the vending machine fell. Homer's coma dream preserves his world exactly as it existed on the day he lost it, because that is what the unconscious mind does when it is cut off from new experience. It does not generate a future. It cycles through what it already knows, running variations and scenarios from the same source material, the same faces and voices and places, but unable to move them forward through time because forward through time requires experience, and experience requires consciousness. The celebrity appearances that flood the later seasons of the show take on a different character when viewed through this lens. Homer's unconscious mind, lying in a hospital bed, receives fragments of external stimulus. The television in his room plays. Visitors sit beside him and talk. Nurses chat with each other in the hallway. News filters in, music plays. Names and voices penetrate the fog of unconsciousness and are absorbed into the dream, incorporated into the narrative that Homer's brain is generating. That is why Springfield in the later seasons is full of famous people appearing in impossible contexts. It is not that Springfield became a magnet for celebrity visitors. It is that Homer's dreaming brain is absorbing fragments of the outside world through his unconscious senses and weaving them into the only story it knows how to tell. Every celebrity who shows up in Springfield is, in this reading, a voice Homer heard through the fog, a name mentioned in a television program that his comatose ears picked up and translated into a character in the dream. The show itself acknowledged this theory. In the 34th season, an episode included a deliberately leaked, fake-deleted scene in which Homer wakes up from a long coma, revealing that everything that had happened since season 4 was a dream. The scene was animated. It was voiced. It was complete. And then the show announced that it was a hoax, a fake scene planted by fictional hackers within the episode's narrative. It was not a real revelation, but the show made it. The writers animated it. They produced a scene in which the coma theory is confirmed, and then they wrapped that scene in a frame that allowed them to deny it. They showed the audience the answer and simultaneously told them it was a joke. The fact that they went to the trouble of creating this scene tells you something important about the relationship between the show's creators and this particular theory. They know about it. They have sat with it long enough to make something in response to it. Their denial came wrapped inside an episode that depicted Homer waking up from a coma, which is exactly the kind of thing you do when a theory is too close to something true to dismiss entirely. Executive producer Al Jean addressed the theory directly in 2015. He said it was not true. He dismissed it as fan speculation, but he did not address the tonal shift after the coma episode. He did not explain why nobody in the show ages. He did not explain the God conversation from 6 months before the coma or account for the increasingly surreal and disconnected quality of the later seasons. He said it was not true and moved on, and the fans did not move on, because the theory does something that no official explanation has ever done. It makes the show make sense, all of it. The aging freeze, the tonal shift, the celebrity flood, the increasingly impossible plots, the reset button that erases consequences between episodes, the fact that Homer can survive anything because nothing is actually happening to his body. His body is in a hospital bed, only his mind is in Springfield, and his mind cannot kill him because his mind is the one telling the story. There is an emotional dimension to this theory that goes beyond the analytical. If the coma theory is true, then the emotional center of The Simpsons is not comedy. It is grief. It is longing. It is the desperate, patient love of a man who has lost his family and cannot stop dreaming about them. Homer's deepest wish, the wish that his unconscious mind returns to episode after episode across 32 years of dreaming, is a very simple one. He wants his family. He wants Marge to still love him. He wants Bart to still be his mischievous, impossible, exhausting little boy. He wants Lisa to still play her saxophone in the room at the end of the hall. He wants Maggie to still be small enough to hold in one arm. He wants Friday night at the house on Evergreen Terrace to never end, and in the coma, it does not end. The dream gives him exactly what he wants. His family is preserved in amber, his children never grow up, his wife never leaves, his life never ends. His brain runs the same story over and over, with infinite variations on the same themes, for as long as it can maintain the signal. Homer's coma is not a nightmare. Under this reading of the show, it is the only version of heaven a man like Homer Simpson would ever ask for. A house on Evergreen Terrace where the kids are always young and the beer is always cold and nobody ever has to say goodbye. And every time Homer survives something impossible in the show, every time the world resets, every time the credits roll and everything returns to normal, it is not lazy writing or a failure of continuity. It is Homer's brain refusing to let the story end. Because if the story ends, if the dream finally collapses, then Homer faces the only thing worse than the coma itself. Waking up. Waking up means finding out how much time has passed, how old his children are now, whether Marge waited, whether anyone is still sitting by his bed, whether the family he has been dreaming about for 30 years has found a way to keep living without him, or whether he does not wake up at all and the dream simply stops, and the silence that follows is the permanent kind. The coma theory will never be confirmed by the show. The writers have denied it and will continue to deny it, but it will also never be fully disproven, because the evidence for it is not a single plot hole or a single continuity error. It is the architecture of the show itself. The aging freeze, the tonal break, the increasing surrealism, the reset button, the celebrity flood, the fact that Homer always finds his way home by the end of the episode, because in the dream, he never left. And every episode you have ever watched since the 1st of April 1993 is a love letter, written by an unconscious father to the family he can feel but cannot reach, in the handwriting of a brain that is slowly losing its ability to hold the pen but refuses to stop writing. The most remarkable thing about the coma theory, when you sit with it long enough, is not that it explains the show's inconsistencies. Any sufficiently elaborate theory can be made to account for inconsistencies if you construct it carefully enough. The remarkable thing is that it makes the show more emotional, not less. It does not reduce The Simpsons to a puzzle with a clever solution. It reveals The Simpsons as something much larger and sadder and more beautiful than any clever solution could contain. If Homer is dreaming, then every episode is an act of love. Every couch gag is the dream reasserting that the family is still there, still together, still on the couch in the living room where Homer left them. Every impossible adventure is Homer's mind, generating the fullest possible life it can imagine for the people he loves. The space missions and the celebrities and the 100 different jobs and the global travels. The dream gives Homer a life that is larger and stranger and more eventful than any life the safety inspector at a nuclear power plant would actually have lived. Because that is what you do when you love someone and cannot be there. You imagine the biggest possible version of their life. You give them everything. You make them matter in ways that the waking world never quite managed. The coma dream is Homer's gift to Homer, the only gift available to him in the darkness of a hospital room. A life that is impossible and enormous and full and warm and always finds its way back to the house on Evergreen Terrace by the end of the episode. Because in the dream, there is always a next episode. There is always one more Sunday, one more chance to sit with Marge on the couch and feel, for a few minutes at the end of a long day, that the family is intact, that the loop is still running, that the dream has not ended. Homer keeps dreaming because ending the dream means confronting what waits on the other side. And what waits on the other side is either a world that has moved on without him, where his children are adults he does not know, and his wife has made her peace, and the house has different people in it who do not know, that Homer Simpson once loved every room in it with a completeness his limited vocabulary could never express. Or the other side is simply the end of the signal, the last episode, the final reset that does not restore anything because there is nothing left to restore. And Homer keeps dreaming because the dream is all he has. And the dream, with all its impossibilities and inconsistencies and celebrity appearances and tonal shifts and cracked cooling towers and yellow skin, is enough. It is more than enough. It is the whole world. as long as the family is in it. Section 3. Who really shot Mr. Burns? Before we begin this section, acknowledge the obvious answer. The show told us who shot Mr. Burns. It was Maggie. Season 7, Episode 1. Baby did it, case closed, move on. Except the case was never actually closed. And the more carefully you look at the evidence, the more the official answer starts to look less like a solution and more like a decision the show made because it needed to end the mystery, not because the clues actually pointed there. Let us go back to the summer of 1995 because context matters here. The Simpsons pulled off something in that summer that no animated television show had ever attempted. A genuine mystery. A real whodunit cliffhanger, constructed with enough care that the show's creators felt confident inviting the entire viewing audience to participate in solving it. Fox promoted it like a cultural event. America's Most Wanted produced a tie-in special called Springfield's Most Wanted, treating the fictional shooting like a real unsolved case. People who had never been especially invested in The Simpsons were suddenly paying attention because the show had transformed itself into a puzzle that everyone was invited to try to solve. The setup, delivered in the Season 6 finale, Who Shot Mr. Burns Part 1, was meticulous. Burns had, over the course of the episode, managed to harm virtually every significant character in Springfield in a specific and personal way. He stole an oil well from beneath Springfield Elementary, gutting the school's budget. He shut down Moe's Tavern by triggering the financial ruin of its owner. He created a sinkhole that collapsed the Springfield retirement castle. He injured Santa's little helper, the Simpson family dog. And then, for his crowning act, he constructed a massive mechanical disc and used it to block the sun over Springfield entirely, not metaphorically. Burns literally stole the sun from the town, positioning his device to block it so that every resident would be forced to purchase electricity from his plant because natural light was no longer available to them. When Smithers protested, Burns fired him. By the time the episode ends, every character in Springfield has been given a clear personal motive for wanting Burns dead. The show was careful about this. It gave viewers genuine reasons to suspect everyone, and it built the suspects list over the course of the episode in a way that felt like a real mystery being constructed by writers who knew what they were doing. Homer had a motive because Burns had spent years being unable to remember his name, despite Homer working directly for him for decades. The humiliation had accumulated into something that the show depicted as a genuine psychological wound. Bart and Lisa had motives because the school had lost its funding. Grandpa Simpson had a motive because the retirement home was destroyed. Groundskeeper Willie had a motive because he lost his job. Tito Puente had a motive because Burns cut the school's music program. Moe had a motive because his bar went under. Even Smithers, freshly fired and spiraling, had the clearest opportunity of anyone. The entire town gathered at a public meeting to confront Burns. Multiple characters were shown holding weapons, and then Burns collapsed, a single gunshot wound. He staggered onto the town's sundial and fell, his hands landing on two letters, W and S, or, if you viewed them from Burns's own perspective, M and S. The ambulance took him away. The screen went dark. And America had to wait an entire summer. When the answer came, in September of 1995, the investigation played out as a comedic procedural. Smithers confessed immediately, but his confession collapsed when it became clear he had been blackout drunk at the relevant time and had actually shot a completely different person, old Jasper, in his wooden leg. One by one, the other suspects were cleared. And then, in the investigation's final act, a crucial piece of evidence emerged. An eyelash found on Burns's clothing. DNA analysis traced it to a Simpson. Homer was arrested. He was about to be convicted. And then Burns woke up and identified his shooter. It was Maggie. Baby Maggie. According to Burns, he had encountered Maggie in the parking lot after the town meeting. He had attempted to take her lollipop. In the struggle, his gun fell from its holster. Maggie picked it up. The gun discharged. Burns was shot. Mystery solved. Except it was not. Let us start with the contest, because the contest reveals something important about the credibility of the official solution. Fox had invited viewers across America to submit their guesses for who shot Burns. Thousands of entries were submitted. According to the DVD commentary for these episodes, not a single person in the randomly selected pool of entries had guessed the correct answer. Nobody won. The prize was awarded anyway. to a randomly selected entrant who had not identified the shooter, and because they did not have the right answer, they received a cash payment rather than the prize of being animated into an episode. The commentary notes that the producers were aware of exactly one person who had posted the correct answer to an online Simpsons discussion group on the night of the original broadcast. This person was using a college internet account. By the time the contest ended and the producers tried to locate them, the account was no longer active. They could not find the one person who had gotten it right. They issued an open invitation for that person to come forward on the DVD release. As far as anyone knows, they never did. Think about what this actually means. The show's creators designed a mystery. They told the public it was solvable from the clues in Part 1. They built a national contest around the premise that a careful viewer could identify the shooter. And when the answer was revealed, essentially the entire audience had failed to identify it. Either the clues were genuinely insufficient for the task, or the red herrings were so effective that they buried the real answer, or the answer did not actually follow logically from the evidence in the way the show claimed it did. Now look at the clues themselves. Burns falls on the sundial. His hands point to W and S, or, from his perspective, M and S. The show tells us this means Maggie Simpson. M for Maggie, S for Simpson. Except Burns himself stated, canonically, on the record within the show's own universe, that his hands pointing at those letters was not intentional. He did not deliberately position himself to point at his attacker's initials. He simply fell. The sundial clue, the central piece of physical evidence that the show uses to justify its answer, was explicitly described by the victim as a coincidence. The biggest clue in the biggest mystery in the show's history is, according to the person it supposedly came from, completely meaningless. Then there is the gun. Burns carried a gun in a holster. In the episode, the holster is shown to be empty before the shooting. The gun was already missing from his person before the attack occurred. Whoever shot Burns used his own weapon, a weapon they obtained from his holster without his awareness before the confrontation in the parking lot. This means the shooter was someone who had already taken the gun from Burns. Most of the suspects at the public meeting had brought their own weapons. They came armed because they were angry enough to consider violence. The person who shot Burns was someone who was not independently armed, who encountered Burns's gun at some point before or during the meeting, and who used it in a moment of either impulse or opportunity. A baby finding a gun on the ground is one reading of this, but it is not the only reading. There is also Burns's reported final words before being shot. "Oh, it's you." He recognized his attacker. He acknowledged them. He was not startled, not afraid, not caught off guard. He said in essence, "I know who you are, the way you would greet someone you have met before but do not consider a threat." Does Burns recognize Maggie Simpson? Has he had any meaningful interaction with Maggie prior to this episode? The show does not establish a relationship between Burns and Maggie. Burns barely recognizes Homer, a man who has worked directly for him for years. The idea that Burns would see an infant in a parking lot and say, in a calm and recognizing tone, "Oh, it is you," as though acknowledging a familiar presence, does not align with the character the show has established. But, "Oh, it is you," does align with certain other suspects, with someone Burns has had a significant prior interaction with. Someone whose face he would recognize, and whose presence in that parking lot he might greet with a kind of resigned acknowledgement rather than fear. In Season 18, Homer claims in casual conversation that he was actually the one who shot Mr. Burns. He says it out loud, on camera. Nobody investigates. Nobody reopens the case. Homer Simpson confesses to the attempted murder of the richest man in Springfield. And the show treats it as a throwaway line that dissolves before the next scene. Either Homer is lying, which is entirely consistent with his character and cannot be ruled out, or the original verdict was wrong and Homer knows it because Homer is the one who actually pulled the trigger. And if Homer did it, then Maggie was not the shooter. She was the answer the investigation landed on, because she was the most convenient answer available, an infant who cannot be prosecuted, who cannot testify, who cannot deny the accusation or explain what she actually saw in that parking lot. Chief Wiggum says it himself. No jury in the world would convict a baby. Maybe not in Texas, he adds, as a joke. But the observation is serious. Maggie is the perfect answer if someone in Springfield needed the real answer to stay buried. She is too young to contradict the official story. She is too young to be punished. She is too young to understand what she is being accused of. Blaming Maggie is, from a certain angle, the cleanest possible way to close a case without solving it. The Marge theory deserves extended attention because it is, arguably, the most internally consistent alternate explanation the evidence supports. A Reddit user constructed the argument carefully. Marge is a devoted mother. She watched Burns systematically destroy everything her family depends on. The school lost its funding, which means Bart and Lisa lost their educational resources. Burns injured the family dog. Burns cut off the sunlight over the entire town. Burns has treated Homer with such comprehensive contempt for so many years that his failure to remember Homer's name has become a running joke, but it is a joke about a real and sustained humiliation that Marge has watched her husband absorb without being able to do anything about it. Marge had every reason to want Burns gone, and Burns once fell in love with Marge. This is established in the episode Marge Gets a Job, in which Burns becomes romantically fixated on Marge after she begins working at the plant. It is played for comedy, but the fixation is genuine within the show's narrative. Burns is infatuated with Marge in a way the show takes seriously enough to build an episode around. The Marge theory asks, what if Burns, lying in that parking lot with a bullet wound, looked up and saw Marge Simpson standing over him? And what if he made a decision in that moment not to identify her? He loves her. He protected her. He took the bullet, regained consciousness, and rather than name the woman he had been fixated on, he looked at the sundial and let the town draw its own conclusions. Maggie became the answer because someone needed an answer, and Maggie was convenient, and Burns had a reason to let the real shooter walk away. The show knows this theory holds water. It knows it well enough that it made an alternate ending in which Smithers is the shooter. A complete alternate conclusion. Fully animated, fully voiced, fully produced. This alternate was shown in The Simpsons' 138th episode Spectacular, where it was dismissed by the host as not making sense because all the DNA evidence pointing to a Simpson would have had to be ignored, which would be, in his words, downright nutty. The episode then makes a direct reference to the O.J. Simpson trial, in which a jury did ignore DNA evidence to reach an acquittal. The show is winking at you. It is telling you that ignoring evidence happens. It is telling you that the official story is not necessarily the true story. It is telling you that the evidence can be pointed in whatever direction serves the people with the power to point it. An early draft of the script had Barney Gumble as the shooter. The writers considered this seriously. They planned to send him to prison. This was eventually abandoned, but the fact of it tells you something important. The answer was not predetermined by the mystery. The mystery was written, and then the answer was determined afterward, and then the clues were adjusted to fit the chosen answer. The story was reverse engineered. The mystery was designed to feel solvable, not to actually be solved. And then consider the final shot of the episode. After everyone has left the room, Maggie is alone. She looks around carefully, making sure nobody is watching. And then she moves her pacifier in a motion that mimics pulling a trigger. The show wants you to read this as confirmation. Maggie knows what she did. But there is another reading that is equally valid within the logic of what the show has established about Maggie's character. Maggie is 1 year old. Babies mimic what they observe. If Maggie was in that parking lot when the shooting happened, if she witnessed someone else fire that gun, then the image of that action, the motion of pulling a trigger, would be imprinted on her. She is not confessing. She is remembering. She watched someone shoot Burns. She is repeating the movement she saw because that is what children at her developmental stage do. They replay experiences through imitation. The official answer is Maggie Simpson. The show committed to it. The writers stand behind it. But the contest that nobody won, the clues that Burns himself described as coincidental, the alternate ending that was fully produced, Homer's unexamined confession in season 18, the final shot that can be read 2 entirely different ways. All of it suggests that the greatest mystery in Simpsons history was never solved. It was closed. And in Springfield, those are 2 very different things. Section 4. The immortality of Charles Montgomery Burns. Charles Montgomery Burns should be dead. By any reasonable accounting of the timeline the show has established for his life, he should have died before most of the show's current audience was born. The question of how he is still alive, still running his empire, still appearing at the power plant every morning to have his impossibly ancient body guided to his chair by the only man who understands how to keep him functioning, is one of the show's longest-running and least examined mysteries. The show has been inconsistent about Burns's exact age in the way that it is inconsistent about nearly everything involving Springfield's internal timeline. But across all the various statements and implications the show has offered over the years, every version of the timeline places his birth somewhere in the late 19th century. He has described personal memories from before the turn of the 20th century. He has spoken about events from the first and second decades of the 1900s as first-hand experiences, not as history he was taught, but as things he was present for. He attended Yale. He served in World War II, and his service record suggests an involvement that requires him to have been a functional adult during the 1940s. He has described knowing Howard Hughes personally. He has referenced the Gilded Age not as a historical period, but as a lived experience. By the most conservative possible reading of these details, Burns is well over 100 years old. By a more generous reading, he is approaching 140. Either figure places him so far outside the boundaries of normal human longevity that the show owes its audience at least an attempt at an explanation. What the show gives us is the scene in the Springfield files. Burns undergoes a weekly medical treatment. The treatment is so intensive, so loaded with synthesized chemicals and controlled radiation, that in the hours following each session, his body emits a visible green glow. This glow is bright enough that Homer, encountering Burns in the dark woods at night, mistakes him for an alien life form. The treatment keeps Burns alive for exactly 7 more days. Without the next dose, his biological systems fail. He dies. The margin for error is 0. His survival is maintained the way you maintain a machine, on a precise schedule, through servicing that cannot be missed. And the service involves radiation, which is, when you sit with it for a moment, a remarkable detail. The man who owns a nuclear power plant, the man whose facility has been contaminating Springfield's water supply and poisoning its residents for decades, is personally dependent on controlled radiation exposure for his own continued survival. Burns is not just profiting from radiation. His body requires it the way a normal human body requires food. Take away the radiation treatment for a single week, and Burns's biological functions collapse. He has been managing his own radiation exposure for over a century, with resources and knowledge that nobody else in Springfield has access to. And the mechanism by which he does this has been running for so long, his body has adapted to it so completely that he can no longer sustain himself without it. The Three Stooges syndrome scene is the other essential piece of the Burns immortality puzzle. A doctor examines Burns and informs him that he has every disease known to medical science simultaneously present in his body, every single one. The doctor's explanation for why Burns is still alive despite this is that the diseases exist in a state of perfect biological equilibrium, each one canceling out the others. Each illness preventing every other illness from advancing far enough to be lethal, because all of them are competing for the same biological real estate at the same time, and none of them can gain dominance. The doctor calls this Three Stooges syndrome. 3 stooges trying to fit through a doorway simultaneously. They all get stuck. None of them gets through. This is played as comedy. It is one of the show's most quoted scenes. Burns leaves the doctor's office having been told he is the sickest man in America and functionally indestructible, and he is delighted by this news. But the comedy frame obscures what is actually being described, which is a biological state that does not occur in nature. No human being has every disease at once in perfect equilibrium. That does not happen. What the doctor is describing is a managed state, a synthetic condition created and maintained through medical intervention. The weekly radiation treatments are not curing Burns's diseases. They are holding each disease in a precise balance against every other disease, preventing any single condition from becoming fatal, maintaining the equilibrium through a recurring adjustment that has to happen on schedule, or the entire system collapses. Burns's body is a reactor, and the weekly treatments are the control rods. They do not eliminate the threat. They manage it. They hold it in a stable configuration through continuous intervention. This is the model for how Burns has been alive for 140 years. Not through any natural process, not through genetic luck, but through a system of engineered medical maintenance that he has spent decades and enormous resources developing and refining. He has essentially solved the problem of his own mortality through the application of wealth and scientific knowledge. He has built a system that keeps him alive as long as the system itself keeps running. Smithers is essential to understanding this. The show has established Smithers's devotion to Burns in terms that are usually discussed through the lens of romantic attachment, the one-sided love story between an assistant and his employer. And that dimension of the relationship is real and has genuine emotional weight. But Smithers's devotion is also at a more practical level, a medical necessity. Smithers manages Burns's schedule. He ensures Burns makes every weekly appointment. He monitors Burns's condition with an attentiveness that goes well beyond professional loyalty. He is, effectively, Burns's primary caregiver, the person responsible for ensuring that every step of the medical maintenance protocol is followed correctly and on time. The show has depicted multiple times what happens when Smithers is absent. Burns becomes helpless quickly, not in a metaphorical sense, in a very practical sense. Without Smithers managing the logistics of Burns's survival, Burns would miss a dose of his treatment. The equilibrium would break. The diseases would surge forward. Burns would die. Smithers is not devoted to Burns simply because he loves him, though he does. He is devoted because he understands, at a level that nobody else in Springfield does, that his absence is a death sentence for the man he cares about. This knowledge is the foundation of their entire relationship. It is what makes Smithers irreplaceable in a way that goes beyond any role he plays in the corporate structure of the power plant. Smithers is the mechanism by which Burns's immortality is maintained. Remove him and the whole system fails within a week. Burns's connection to historical events adds another dimension to the immortality question. The show has placed Burns in personal proximity to an absurd range of significant moments across American history. He attended an elite university in an era when that carried a very different set of social meanings than it does today. He served in a war that ended before most of the show's audience was born. He has described personal relationships with figures from the early 20th century as casual acquaintances, the way you might mention a neighbor you used to know. He has referenced the Gilded Age not as a historical period studied in books, but as a time he remembers living through. The Burns family itself is described in the show as one of the oldest continuously powerful dynasties in American history. The family wealth predates the Industrial Revolution. The Burns name appears in historical contexts that suggest a centuries-long pattern of accumulation and control, a lineage that has been shaping American economic and political reality for longer than the country's formal institutions have existed. This raises a question the show never answers. Is Burns unique in his family's history? Is he the first Burns to extend his lifespan beyond natural limits through the application of wealth and technology? Or has this been happening for longer? Before nuclear radiation, before modern medicine, before the specific tools Burns currently uses to maintain himself, did the Burns dynasty employ other methods to preserve their hold on power and their continuity of control? The show does not say. But it does establish that the Burns family has exercised continuous influence over American affairs for a period that no normal generational succession could explain. You do not maintain that kind of continuity through natural turnover. You maintain it either through extraordinary fortune, which the show does not suggest, or through something else. Through measures that ensure the continuity of power is not interrupted by something as inconvenient as the natural death of the people who hold it. Burns has come closer to dying than almost any other character in the show's history. He has been shot. He has been hospitalized repeatedly. He has been abandoned in wilderness and exposed to conditions that should have killed him. And every time, he comes back. Not through the cartoonish physical resilience that allows Homer to survive being hit by a car, but through infrastructure, through money, through the machinery of wealth that ensures there is always someone nearby with the resources and the knowledge to intervene. Homer survives things because the show needs him to survive. Burns survives things because he has spent a century building a system designed to ensure his survival, regardless of what happens to his physical body. Every dollar he has ever spent, every institution he has corrupted, every politician he has purchased, every physician he has retained, and every experimental treatment he has funded, it all serves the same single purpose. Keep Burns alive. Keep the treatments coming, keep the diseases balanced, keep the reactor running. Because if Burns dies, his empire does not simply pass to an heir. His empire requires his specific knowledge, his specific relationships, his specific understanding of the systems he has built over 100 years. Without Burns, the power plant has no one at the controls who understands its real function. Without Burns, the medical maintenance protocol that keeps it all running disappears with him. The scariest dimension of the Burns immortality theory is not that he might live indefinitely. It is that Springfield cannot afford for him to die. The town's economy depends on the power plant. The power plant depends on Burns. Burns depends on his treatments. His treatments depend on the infrastructure that his wealth provides. It is a closed loop. A self-sustaining system in which the man, the machine, and the money all feed each other in a cycle that has been running for a century and shows no sign of stopping. Springfield cannot kill Burns because Springfield cannot function without him. And Burns cannot die because dying would mean the system he built would finally have to answer for what it has done to the people living inside it. Burns is kept alive by weekly radiation treatments, sustained by a fortune that predates the nation he operates within, protected by an assistant whose devotion is functionally a medical requirement, and surrounded by a population too damaged by the environment he has created to question why their employer glows in the dark and casually references events from before their grandparents were born. He is not immortal in the mythological sense. He is something more modern, more clinical, more specific to the world the show is actually depicting. He is too expensive to die. And Springfield will keep paying that cost for as long as Burns keeps the lights on. Which, if his treatment schedule holds, will be forever. There is one final dimension to the Burns immortality question that the show never addresses directly, but that is implied by everything it has established about the relationship between Burns and the town he controls. Burns has spent over a century ensuring that his survival is structurally necessary to the people who depend on him. He has made himself not just difficult to kill, but impossible to kill, without destroying the community in the process. This is the most sophisticated form of self-protection available. Not the physical kind, not walls or guards or weapons, but the architectural kind. The protection of being indispensable. The protection of being so thoroughly woven into the fabric of the community's survival that removing him would unravel the fabric entirely. This is why Burns does not fear Springfield's anger. He has faced it many times. He has faced mobs and legal challenges, and political campaigns built explicitly around his removal, and angry crowds at public meetings holding weapons. He has survived all of it not through superior force, but because at the moment of maximum pressure, when the town has organized itself sufficiently to actually challenge him, someone always realizes what the challenge will cost. Someone always does the calculation, and the calculation always comes out the same way. Burns is cheaper to keep than to remove. The damage he does is bounded and familiar. The damage his removal would cause is unbounded and unknown. Burns understands this better than anyone. He understood it long before the community did. He built the dependence deliberately, carefully, over a very long time, precisely so that this calculation would always resolve in his favor. Every power line he installed is a chain. Every job he created is a reason not to challenge him. Every decade of operation is another layer of the infrastructure that makes his continued existence feel like a necessity rather than a choice. Springfield chose Burns, not through a single decision made at any one moment, but through 10,000 small decisions made across a century, each one individually reasonable, each one accepting a slightly worse deal than the one before, each one adding another thread to the net in which the town is now comprehensively caught. Burns did not conquer Springfield. He cultivated it. The way you cultivate anything you intend to harvest indefinitely, carefully, patiently, with a full understanding of what the harvest will cost, and the complete confidence that the harvested will never organize effectively enough to stop you. He is too expensive to die. And Springfield will keep paying the bill. And Burns will keep the lights on, and the cooling towers will keep leaking, and the water will stay contaminated, and the fish will keep their extra eyes, and Homer will keep showing up to Sector 7G. And the loop will keep running, forever, or something close enough to it that the difference does not matter. Section 5. The Principal and the Pauper. Springfield's infrastructure of denial. There is an episode of The Simpsons that fans have argued about for nearly 30 years, not because it is confusing or ambiguous, but because it is so clear. It is one of the most straightforward episodes the show ever produced. It shows you exactly what Springfield is. And the audience largely hated it for that. The episode is Season 9, Episode 2, The Principal and the Pauper. It aired on the 28th of September 1997, and it remains one of the most divisive in the series. The backlash was immediate and fierce. Harry Shearer, the voice actor who plays both Principal Skinner and Mr. Burns, publicly expressed his displeasure with the storyline. Critics and fans identified it as the moment the show stopped respecting its own continuity. It has been called the episode that broke The Simpsons. It is consistently ranked among the worst in the series. But if you look at what the episode actually does, rather than what it undoes, it is one of the most honest things The Simpsons ever put on screen. Here is what happens. Springfield Elementary holds an event honoring Principal Seymour Skinner's 20 years of service to the school. In the middle of the celebration, a stranger arrives, a man nobody recognizes. He introduces himself as Sergeant Seymour Skinner, the real Seymour Skinner, a decorated Vietnam War veteran who was captured as a prisoner of war, presumed dead, and who has now returned after surviving his captivity and making his way home, only to discover that someone else has been living his life for the past 2 decades. The man Springfield has known as Principal Skinner is an imposter. His real name is Armin Tamzarian. Before Vietnam, Tamzarian was a street punk and petty criminal with no meaningful future and no stable identity. He was drafted, served in the same unit as the real Skinner, and when Skinner was captured and believed killed, Tamzarian felt the weight of guilt pressed down on him. He traveled to Springfield to deliver the news of Skinner's death to his mother, Agnes. But when he arrived, Agnes assumed he was her son. She needed him to be her son. And Tamzarian, who had never been claimed by anyone, who had never had a family or an identity worth keeping, accepted the role. He became Seymour Skinner. He took the name, the rank, the life, the mother, the career, all of it. And he inhabited that stolen identity for 20 years until the real Skinner walked through the door and everything collapsed. Now, Springfield faces a genuine crisis of identity. The real Skinner is present. The imposter is present. The truth is completely and undeniably exposed. Every person in the room knows that their principal is a fraud who has been living under a false name for 2 decades. What does Springfield do? Springfield holds a vote. Not a vote on how to handle the legal consequences. Not a vote on what reparations might be owed to the real Skinner or what accountability Tamzarian should face. Springfield votes on whether to acknowledge the truth at all. And the verdict is unanimous. They vote to keep the lie. Judge Snyder issues a legal decree. The imposter is henceforth and legally the real Seymour Skinner. The actual Seymour Skinner, the war hero, the man who survived a prisoner of war camp and came home to find his life taken from him, is tied to a railroad car and physically removed from Springfield. And the judge makes it explicitly and formally illegal to ever mention what actually happened under penalty of torture. Read that sequence back. A town in full possession of definitive proof that a public figure had been living a stolen identity for 20 years, voted to keep the lie. They had the actual victim of the identity theft standing in front of them. They chose the fake over the real. They sentenced the truth to exile, made its utterance a criminal act, and expelled the messenger from the community. Fans hated this episode because they felt it destroyed Skinner's character. Everything they thought they knew about him, his military service, his complicated relationship with his mother, his dynamic with Bart, his entire history, turned out to be based on a fiction. The episode felt like a betrayal of the show's continuity and of the emotional investment the audience had made in the character. But the episode is completely honest about something the show had been demonstrating for years. It just shows you the mechanism. Every other time Springfield forgets something catastrophic, every other time the show resets after a world-altering event, it happens between episodes, off-screen, in the negative space between one week's story and the next. This episode is the only time The Simpsons lets you watch the forgetting happen in real time. It shows you the actual vote. It shows you the legal decree. It shows you the literal act of expelling truth from the community's accepted reality. Consider how many times Springfield has experienced events that should permanently alter its reality. The town has been physically destroyed on multiple occasions and rebuilt completely by the next episode with no explanation. It has been sealed under a glass dome by the federal government. It has survived nuclear near misses and environmental catastrophes of the kind that would leave real communities permanently changed. It has encountered phenomena that would force a genuine reckoning with the nature of its existence. And every single time, by the following episode, everything is normal. Nobody references what happened. The slate is clean. People who study The Simpsons call this episodic storytelling. It is a standard convention of television production, especially for animated shows, where the logistics of continuous serialized narrative are considerably more complicated than in live-action drama. Characters reset because the show is designed as a collection of standalone stories rather than a single developing arc. The Principal and the Pauper offers a different explanation. Springfield resets because the town chooses to reset, deliberately, collectively, through an unspoken social contract that is occasionally made explicit, as it is in this episode, but that operates quietly in the background of every other episode in the series. The contract says, "We will not acknowledge what happened. We will maintain the agreed-upon version of reality. We will treat the comfortable lie as truth, and we will treat the true account as criminal. Anyone who breaks this contract will be removed from the community." This is not a cartoon trope. This is a description of how real communities manage truths that would be too costly to absorb. Small towns in particular have a remarkable capacity for collective denial. Things happen that everyone knows about and nobody talks about. Scandals get buried not because the information is unavailable, but because the community decides, through a kind of collective negotiation that does not require anyone to articulate it explicitly, that the comfortable version of events is the one that will be maintained. People who insist on the true version are treated with hostility, because their insistence is a challenge to the shared fiction that holds the community together. Springfield does not forget the things that have happened to it because its residents are incapable of memory. It forgets because remembering is economically and socially impossible. If the town remembered every catastrophe, it would have to confront the sources of those catastrophes. If it confronted the power plant, the economy would collapse. If the economy collapsed, the town would cease to function. So the town forgets. It votes to forget. It makes forgetting the law. The real Seymour Skinner arriving in Springfield, with proof that the official narrative is a lie, represents exactly the kind of threat that the town's denial mechanism is designed to neutralize. He is a man who shows up with evidence that something everyone has believed is false, and the town's response is not to engage with that evidence. The response is to remove the person presenting it and make it illegal to discuss. That is not a comedy beat. That is a description of how Springfield maintains its impossible reality through the systematic destruction of anything that threatens it. And if the coma theory is true, this episode takes on an even more unsettling dimension. If everything since season 4 is Homer's dream, then Homer's unconscious mind generated a scenario in which an entire town votes to sustain a lie, because that is precisely what Homer needs to believe. He needs to believe that fake lives can become real through collective agreement. He needs to believe that an adopted identity can replace a stolen one and be accepted as genuine. He needs to believe that the lie can hold forever if enough people choose to maintain it, because that is what Homer's coma is. A lie, he is telling himself. A dream masquerading as consciousness. And as long as the dream town of Springfield keeps voting to maintain the fiction, Homer never has to wake up and face the real version of his life, with its real passage of time and its real consequences. The Principal and the Pauper is not the worst Simpsons episode. In the context of everything else the show has built around the mechanisms of Springfield's reality, it is arguably the most important one. It is the only episode that shows you the machinery, the vote, the decree, the exile, the moment where the community's commitment to its own comfortable fiction becomes explicit and undeniable. Armin Tamzarian is still pretending to be Seymour Skinner. Springfield is still pretending everything is fine, and the real Seymour Skinner is still out there somewhere, tied to a train, expelled from his own life. The last honest man in a town that made honesty a crime. Section 6. Maggie Simpson, the smartest person in Springfield. There is a 1-year-old sitting in a high chair in the kitchen of the house on Evergreen Terrace. She has been 1-year-old for 36 years. She cannot reliably walk without falling. She communicates primarily through pacifier movements and the occasional pointed stare. By any surface reading of the evidence, she is a baby. She is exactly what she appears to be. She is also, by a substantial margin, the most capable member of her family. She may be the most capable person in all of Springfield. She has simply decided that nobody needs to know this. Let us start with what Maggie has actually done. She shot a man. Not accidentally, not as the result of a random chain of events, but in a way that left enough ambiguity about her intent and her awareness to generate 30 years of debate about whether she understood exactly what she was doing. We have already covered the evidence around who actually pulled the trigger in the Burns shooting, but whatever the truth of that event, the aftermath is revelatory. An infant was identified as the person who fired a weapon into a billionaire. The police investigated. The evidence was examined by official Springfield law enforcement, and the conclusion they reached was that, yes, this baby committed an act of violence against a grown man, and there is literally nothing the legal system can do about it. And then, when everyone has left the room and Maggie is alone, she checks her surroundings. She looks left, and she looks right, with the deliberate attentiveness of someone who has learned that being observed has consequences. And when she has confirmed she is not being watched, she moves her pacifier in a motion that precisely mimics pulling a trigger. Take that sequence of actions apart. She waited for privacy. She assessed her environment. She confirmed she was unobserved. She then performed the action. That is situational awareness. That is behavioral caution. That is impulse control sophisticated enough to delay a reaction until the social conditions are safe for it. These are not capabilities that developmental science associates with 12-month-old infants. These are the behavioral patterns of someone who understands that certain things should not be witnessed, of someone who has a strategic relationship with being seen. The Longest Daycare is a theatrical short film released in 2012. It is 7 minutes long. It was screened in cinemas before an Ice Age film and was nominated for an Academy Award. It is in many ways the clearest and most extended portrait of Maggie's actual cognitive capabilities that the franchise has ever produced. Maggie is dropped off at the Ayn Rand School for Tots, a daycare facility run with the kind of regimented efficiency that leaves no room for individual agency. Inside, Maggie encounters a caterpillar preparing to form a chrysalis. Another baby, a recurring rival named Gerald who has been her nemesis since infancy, wants to destroy it. What follows is a 7-minute sustained demonstration of Maggie operating at a cognitive level that has no business existing inside a 1-year-old body. She reads the environment around her and identifies the structural features of the facility that are relevant to her goal. She develops a plan. When the plan requires adjustment because circumstances change, she adjusts. She outmaneuvers the bully, the staff, and the physical security of the building itself, not through luck or accident, but through a sequence of deliberate choices that require her to predict how other people will behave and position herself accordingly. Every decision she makes in the course of those 7 minutes is correct. Every move is optimal, and she does all of this while being physically limited to a body that cannot walk without falling, that lacks the motor coordination to do many of the things her mind has determined are necessary, that is operating on infant physiology despite operating on something very far from infant cognition. Her body cannot keep up with her mind. She falls, she stumbles, she crawls when she should be running. But she succeeds anyway, because the gap between her physical and cognitive development is something she has clearly been navigating for some time, and she has learned to compensate for physical limitations through the application of intelligence and planning. The show has tested Maggie's intelligence directly in various episodes. The results vary, because the show is not always careful about its own continuity, but the implication across multiple instances is consistent. When standardized measures are applied to Maggie in any meaningful way, the results are extraordinary, off the charts in ways that the testing instruments are not designed to capture. The show plays these revelations as quick jokes and moves on, but the accumulation of them tells a consistent story. Maggie is not a normal baby. She has never been a normal baby. And then there is the silence. Maggie's defining characteristic is that she does not speak. Her first word, Daddy, was spoken once, voiced by Elizabeth Taylor in an appearance that the show treated as a special event and then never repeated. In 36 years of episodes, Maggie has not developed language in any meaningful way. She is surrounded by a family of extraordinarily verbal people. Homer narrates his own experience as it happens. Marge processes everything through conversation. Bart provokes constantly through words. Lisa lectures and argues and interrogates. The Simpson household is a wall of continuous sound, and in the center of it, Maggie sits in complete silence, watching everything, processing everything, and saying nothing. The theory, supported by everything the show has actually shown about Maggie's capabilities, is that this silence is a choice A strategic decision made by a mind intelligent enough to understand that being overlooked is protective, that being dismissed as a baby prevents scrutiny, that the less attention people pay to you, the more you can accomplish, and the less interference you face from people who would complicate your goals. Look at what happens to the intelligent women in Maggie's immediate family. Lisa is brilliant. Lisa's intelligence is one of the show's most consistent and foundational character traits. She is more intellectually capable than every adult in her household and most of the adults in Springfield. And what has that intelligence given her? Isolation. She is consistently mocked, dismissed, or ignored by her peers. She challenges the adults around her and faces resistance at every turn. She tries to improve the world she lives in and finds that the world does not want to be improved by someone her age. Lisa's intelligence is her most defining quality and simultaneously the thing that most reliably makes her life harder. She wears her capability openly, and the community responds by ensuring she understands how little it matters. Maggie has watched this. She has watched her sister fight every day for recognition and receive in return frustration and dismissal. She has watched the smartest member of the family be consistently undermined by a household and a community that cannot accommodate her. And Maggie, in her high chair, with her enormous eyes and her pacifier, and her 36 years of accumulated observation, has learned a different lesson than the one Lisa operates by. Lisa's lesson is to keep speaking, to keep fighting, to keep insisting that intelligence and principle matter even when the evidence suggests they do not. It is an admirable lesson. It is also, in Springfield, an exhausting and largely unrewarded one. Maggie's lesson is different. Silence is power. Invisibility is protection. The less they notice you, the more freedom you have to act. The more completely you disguise yourself as something small and harmless and dependent, the less anyone thinks to wonder what you are actually doing. Think about how this plays out across the show's history. Every remarkable thing Maggie does happens below the radar. Every heroic act, every display of extraordinary capability occurs in the margins, in the spaces where nobody is paying attention. The Burns shooting happened in a parking lot, late at night, with no witnesses. The daycare rebellion happened among infants, a population that adults routinely observe with the kind of fond, unfocused attention that notices nothing specific. Every time Maggie acts, she acts in the spaces the world has decided are not worth watching carefully. And she ensures that those spaces remain available to her by maintaining the most effective possible cover. She pretends to be exactly what everyone assumes she is: quiet, passive, dependent, helpless. She performs babyhood with complete commitment, and the performance is so convincing that even the people who love her most have largely failed to notice what is sitting behind those enormous eyes. Now connect this to the radiation theory. If the contaminated environment of Springfield creates mutations that affect each resident differently, then Maggie represents one extreme of a spectrum that Homer represents the other extreme of. Homer's mutation diminished his cognitive function to clinical levels, while simultaneously making his body extraordinarily durable. The radiation took something away from him and replaced it with a kind of physical resilience that is its own form of adaptation. Maggie's mutation, in this reading, amplified her cognitive function to levels that cannot be properly measured, while leaving her physical development essentially normal for her stated age. She is cognitively decades ahead of where her biology suggests she should be. Homer and Maggie are two sides of the same radioactive outcome: same environment, same contaminated water, same irradiated air, same family genetics interacting with the same external toxin, but the effects moved in opposite directions. The father's brain was diminished, the daughter's was magnified. And if the coma theory is true, Maggie's genius takes on a completely different emotional meaning. If Homer is dreaming, if every episode since season 4 is the product of a man trying to hold on to his family from the inside of an unconscious mind, then Maggie's extraordinary capability is Homer's deepest hope given form. He cannot watch her grow up. He cannot hear her speak or see her become whoever she is going to be. He cannot be there for the moments that define her development. So, in the dream, he makes her extraordinary. He gives her an intelligence that transcends her age and her circumstances. He makes her capable of things that ensure she will be safe and remarkable and impossible to overlook, even in a world that has stopped paying attention to her. Maggie's genius in the coma reading is a father's prayer, the most specific and personal wish of a man who cannot be there to protect his youngest child, and has given her, in the only way available to him, the most powerful protection he can imagine, an intelligence that will carry her through whatever comes, even if he cannot. But back in the waking version of Springfield, there is a darker reading available. Maggie does not speak because speaking has not been rewarded in this town. She does not reveal her capabilities, because capability is punished here. She watches everything, she remembers everything, she understands everything, and she waits. What she is waiting for, the show has never told us. Maggie's endgame is the last genuinely open mystery in the Simpson family. Her future remains completely undetermined because the show has never shown us what she is building toward, with all of that accumulated observation and silence and strategic restraint. We have seen glimpses. We have seen her stop a bullet. We have seen her lead a room full of babies. We have seen her solve problems that adults cannot. We have seen her provide judgments that the family trusts completely and implicitly, not because they understand her intelligence, but because they have learned, on some level below articulation, that Maggie's assessments are reliable. Maggie Simpson is 1 year old. She cannot walk without assistance. She cannot speak more than a syllable. She is the most powerful person on Evergreen Terrace. She has simply not decided what to do about it yet. And the scariest thing about her is not what she has already done. It is what she has spent 36 years preparing to do. Behind the pacifier, behind the enormous eyes, behind the sustained and deliberate silence, something is thinking. Something is planning. Something is watching the family and the town and the world with an intelligence that nobody suspects because nobody has been paying the right kind of attention. When Maggie finally decides to act, when she breaks the silence she has maintained for longer than most of the show's audience has been alive, Springfield will not see it coming. That is exactly how she designed it. Section 7. Mona Simpson and the conspiracy that broke 3 generations. For the first 6 seasons of The Simpsons, Homer's mother was dead. This was the official story. It was the story Abe Simpson told his son. He showed Homer a grave. Homer mourned the way a child mourns what he is told to mourn. He grew up believing he was a boy whose mother had died while he was young, and that belief became the foundation of everything Homer is as a person. His desperate and often embarrassing need for approval, his terror of abandonment, his willingness to absorb humiliation and indignity from his employer rather than risk losing the stability he has built around himself. His clinging attachment to Marge, the love that is genuine and deep but also shot through with the anxiety of someone who knows, somewhere below conscious thought, what it feels like to be left. Homer Simpson's entire emotional architecture is a response to maternal loss. His personality is a coping mechanism built around a wound inflicted when he was 6 years old. And in Season 7, the show revealed that the wound was inflicted deliberately, that the loss was not natural, that the mother who disappeared from Homer's life was not dead but alive, and that she had been forced into that disappearance by the same man Homer would grow up to work for. The episode is called Mother Simpson. It aired the 19th of November, 1995. It is widely considered one of the greatest episodes the show has ever produced, and not because of its comedy, which is present but understated, but because of its emotional honesty. It treats a serious thing seriously, and it does not flinch. Here is what happens. Homer fakes his own death to get out of a work obligation. He pushes a dummy off a cliff near the plant, and the town declares him dead. Marge always insists he go to the Hall of Records to correct the official record. While there, Homer makes a discovery. According to municipal records, his mother is alive. She never died. The grave Abe showed him all those years ago was not hers. It was the grave of Walt Whitman, the poet, whose headstone Abe had been presenting to Homer as evidence of his mother's burial for Homer's entire life. Homer finds Mona at a cemetery. She is visiting what she believes to be her son's grave, the grave the town has just officially created for Homer following his staged death. She does not recognize him at first. He has changed. He is not the 6-year-old she last saw. But when Homer proves who he is, the reunion is one of the most genuinely affecting scenes in the series. A grown man and his mother, separated for 27 years, finding each other beside a headstone that belongs to neither of them. And then Mona tells him what happened. The story goes back to 1969. Mona Simpson was a housewife. She was married to Abe. She had a young son named Homer. She was living a quiet, ordinary life in Springfield, while the world outside was burning through the civil rights movement, the counterculture, the protests against an increasingly unpopular war. And then, through a sequence of events the show depicts with characteristic absurdity but genuine emotional weight, Mona was radicalized. She joined a group of activists. The show calls them hippies, but the show also makes clear that their cause was not frivolous. They had targeted something real, a biological weapons laboratory, owned by Mr. Burns. Let that land for a moment. Burns did not just own a nuclear power plant with 342 safety violations. He owned a facility designed to produce biological weapons. He was manufacturing weaponized pathogens in Springfield, the same town where Homer was growing up, the same town where children played and families lived without any knowledge of what was being synthesized in the building down the road. Mona and her group broke into the facility. They detonated what the show describes as an antibiotic bomb, a device designed to destroy the biological agent stored inside the lab rather than to harm anyone directly. During the raid, the release of antibiotic material accidentally cured the asthma of the building's security guard, who happened to be Clancy Wiggum, the man who would later become Springfield's chief of police. The raid was successful. The pathogens were destroyed, but Mona made one mistake. As the group fled, she stopped to help someone who had been knocked down in the chaos. That someone was Mr. Burns. She paused in her escape to help the man whose weapons she had just destroyed, because that is who Mona is. Even in the middle of an act of sabotage against a biological weapons program, she stopped to help a person who had fallen. Burns saw her face. He identified her, he reported her to the FBI, and from that moment, Mona Simpson was a fugitive. She could not go home, she could not contact her family. She could not hold her son or explain to him what was happening or why she was leaving. She kissed Homer goodbye while he was sleeping and vanished into the night. For 27 years, Homer woke up and his mother was gone. And because Abe chose to protect himself and his family from association with a federal fugitive, he told Homer the only story he could tell. She died. She is buried in this grave. She loved you, but she is gone. Homer spent the next 3 decades of his life believing that he was the kind of son a mother would rather be dead than raise. That belief, planted when he was 6 years old by a lie his father told to protect him, shaped everything he became. Now here is where the conspiracy takes a shape that the show lays out in pieces across multiple seasons, never quite assembling them explicitly, leaving the architecture for the audience to construct. Burns did not just identify Mona to the FBI. He pursued her. He held a personal grudge against a woman who had destroyed his biological weapons program and who had helped someone up while doing it. He used his resources, his connections, and his influence to ensure she remained a fugitive. When Mona returns to Springfield in Season 7, Burns spots her almost immediately. He recognizes her through a cab window and calls the authorities. The FBI arrives at the Simpson house. Mona has to run again. Homer has to say goodbye to his mother for the second time, this time knowing exactly why she is leaving and who is responsible. And the man responsible is his employer. Homer works for Burns. Homer has worked for Burns his entire adult life. Homer earns his paycheck from the same man who destroyed his family, who drove his mother underground when Homer was 6 years old, who has spent decades ensuring she cannot return. And Homer does not connect these things in a way that produces any lasting change in his behavior. He does not confront Burns. He does not quit. He returns to the plant. He sits back down in Sector 7G. This is not played as a joke. It is played as something quieter and sadder than a joke. Homer's inability to act on this knowledge is presented as a consequence of his limitations, the cognitive impairment, the emotional dependency, the decades of accumulated damage from the environment Burns's plant has created. Homer knows somewhere in him what Burns has done. He simply cannot mobilize that knowledge into action. The gap between knowing and doing has been made too wide by everything that has been done to him. Burns engineered this. The show reveals this across multiple later episodes, assembling the pieces of the mechanism one at a time. Burns drove Mona out when Homer was a child. The absence of his mother ensured that Homer grew up emotionally damaged in specific and useful ways. The desperation for approval, the terror of abandonment, the willingness to accept degradation rather than risk losing stability, these are not character quirks. They are the predictable, psychological outcomes of maternal abandonment in early childhood, and they are precisely the traits that make Homer an ideal employee. A psychologically healthy person, raised in a stable family with both parents present, would not work in the conditions Homer works in, for the compensation Homer receives from an employer who openly disrespects him. A person with intact self-worth and the capacity for genuine self-advocacy would have left the plant or organized against Burns or found some other form of resistance long ago. But Homer cannot do these things. He was broken before he was old enough to understand what was happening to him. And the broken version of Homer is exactly what the power plant requires. A later episode reveals that the arrangement is even more structurally determined than this. Burns had committed a crime, and Grandpa Simpson discovered it. In exchange for Grandpa's silence, Burns guaranteed Homer a job at the plant in perpetuity, regardless of his performance. The deal protected Homer's employment no matter what he did or failed to do. 742 documented errors, and Homer was never permanently dismissed, because the deal between his father and his mother's persecutor, made in secret, maintained in silence, and never explained to Homer, protected him. Homer's job security, the thing that has always seemed like a convenient cartoon contrivance, is actually a contractual obligation between two men who both knew things that Homer was never told. The full shape of the conspiracy, when you assemble it from the pieces the show has distributed across decades of episodes, is this. Burns owned a biological weapons lab in Springfield. Mona Simpson helped destroy it. Burns used his resources to make her a federal fugitive. Abe Simpson, to protect himself and Homer from association with a fugitive, lied and told Homer his mother was dead. Homer grew up emotionally damaged by the loss of his mother in ways that made him precisely the kind of compliant, unresisting employee that Burns needed. Burns further secured Homer's employment through a private deal with Abe that ensured Homer would never be fired regardless of his performance. And Homer has spent his entire adult life working for the man who took his mother away, never fully connecting the dots, never finding his way to a clear picture of the architecture of his own suffering. 3 generations of one family, systematically shaped by one man's grudge. Abe made a deal with the person responsible for his wife's exile. Homer inherited the consequences of that deal without understanding them, and Mona lived for decades as a fugitive, never able to come home, never able to hold her son, because she helped a man who had been knocked down by the chaos she had created, and that man looked up at her face and recognized her. Mona died in a later season. Her death scene is one of the show's most quietly devastating. Homer sits beside her. He holds her hand. He watches his mother slip away for the last time, and the show does not cut away from it, does not undercut it with a joke, does not reset it by the next scene. It simply shows a man losing his mother for the second time, with the full weight of 27 stolen years pressing down on both of them. The Simpsons is a comedy. It has always been a comedy. But underneath the comedy, there is a story about a family that was deliberately dismantled by one man's power and one town's inability to resist it. Mona fought back and lost everything. Abe made a deal with the source of the damage and buried the truth. Homer inherited the wreckage and never understood why his life felt so heavy. Burns won. Burns always wins in Springfield, because in Springfield, the person with the money writes the rules. And the rules are written to ensure that Homer Simpson keeps working at the power plant, keeps absorbing the radiation, keeps failing to connect the pieces, keeps sitting in Sector 7G, earning his paycheck from the man who stole his childhood, and keeps not knowing, because not knowing is the most important part. Section 8. The Simpsons predictions: how a cartoon shaped reality. The Simpsons predictions have become one of the most widely discussed phenomena in the history of television. Every time a real-world event occurs that bears some resemblance to something the show depicted in an earlier season, the internet produces a screenshot, assigns it the caption, "The Simpsons predicted it," and the cycle of amazement and skepticism begins again. The show has been treated as prophetic, as conspiratorial, as evidence of secret knowledge and hidden information. People who have not watched the show in 20 years share clips of it as though they are sharing documentary footage of the future. The truth is more interesting than any of those interpretations, and it starts with the most famous prediction of all. In the year 2000, in an episode called Bart to the Future, the show depicted a version of the future in which Lisa Simpson has become the first female president of the United States. During the episode, Lisa refers to the budget surplus she has inherited from her predecessor. Her predecessor is identified, in the episode, as Donald Trump. The episode aired 16 years before Trump won the 2016 presidential election. The internet's response to this was enormous. Screenshots from the episode went viral repeatedly. The phrase, "The Simpsons predicted it," became a cultural reflex applied to this image again and again across different news cycles. People who had barely thought about the show in years suddenly found themselves watching old clips and wondering what else the writers had known. The list of apparent predictions is genuinely long. A 1,995 episode depicted a device that looks remarkably similar to a modern smartwatch, years before wearable technology existed in the mainstream. A 1,994 episode sent Homer to space alongside Buzz Aldrin, in a narrative that captures something of the spirit of commercial space tourism that would develop decades later. A 1,998 episode included a mathematical equation that appears to predict the mass of the Higgs boson particle, which was not experimentally confirmed until 2012. A 1,999 episode had Homer propose a theory about the shape of the universe that bears some resemblance to a later cosmological hypothesis about the universe's topology. A 1,993 episode depicted a flu virus originating in Asia, spreading to Springfield and causing widespread panic, supply shortages, and a frantic search for treatment 27 years before the COVID-19 pandemic. And then there are the more specific ones. The siege of Fox News depicted in a 2004 episode, the NSA surveillance joke from 1,994 that was simply a straightforward description of what would be revealed as actually occurring a decade later. The autocorrect failure gag from 1,994, in an era before smartphones existed in any form. The depiction of video calling as a mundane technology in episodes from the mid-1990s, most striking among the more precise examples. A 1,998 episode depicted Disney acquiring 20th Century Fox, which actually happened in 2019. A 1,996 episode called Homerpalooza included a joke about the hip-hop group Cypress Hill accidentally booking the London Symphony Orchestra. 28 years after that joke aired, Cypress Hill performed with the London Symphony Orchestra at the Royal Albert Hall. The joke from 1,996 and the event from 2024 are separated by nearly 3 decades, and they are virtually identical. So, how does the show do this? The people who actually make The Simpsons have been asked this question many times, and their answer is consistent and unromantic. Al Jean, the show's longtime executive producer, has described it as a simple matter of probability. When you produce 800 episodes over 36 years, each containing dozens of satirical observations about American culture and society, some of those observations are going to align with future events through sheer statistical inevitability. The content volume is large enough that coincidences become mathematically certain rather than remarkable. Bill Oakley, who ran the show during several of its peak creative seasons, has put it even more directly. He has said that most of what gets called a prediction is simply history repeating itself in ways that make old jokes feel freshly relevant. The Simpsons is not predicting the future. The Simpsons is observing patterns in human behavior and American culture that have been consistent for decades, and those patterns continue to generate outcomes that resemble what the show depicted because the underlying forces shaping those outcomes have not fundamentally changed. Fact-checking organizations have worked through many of the most popular claimed predictions and found, consistently, that the explanations are more mundane than the viral framing suggests. The Trump presidency gag was written by someone who had watched Trump publicly flirt with running for office since the late 1980s, a pattern that was observable to anyone paying attention. The Disney-Fox merger joke was made by writers who were watching media consolidation accelerate across the entertainment industry and extrapolated the obvious conclusion. The smartwatch gag came from writers thinking about where personal technology was clearly heading. These were not prophecies. They were extrapolations made by very smart, very well-read people who were better at seeing the direction things were moving than the average observer. The Simpsons writing staff has historically been one of the most academically credentialed in television. Many writers hold advanced degrees from elite institutions. Many have backgrounds in mathematics, computer science, political philosophy, and other fields that provide frameworks for thinking about systemic change and trend analysis. These are people who think carefully about where things are going, and they have been doing so for longer than most of their audience has been paying attention. So the mechanism behind most of the predictions is simply this: expert observers making thoughtful extrapolations from observable trends, generating a massive volume of content over a very long time, and having the internet filter that content through confirmation bias until only the accurate predictions are remembered. Confirmation bias is the crucial element here. The Simpsons has also made predictions that did not come true, many of them. Jokes about jetpacks and moon colonies and specific technological developments that never materialized. Jokes about political outcomes that went differently than the show suggested. Jokes about cultural shifts that did not happen the way the writers expected. Nobody takes screenshots of those. Nobody shares them on social media. Nobody builds a viral post around a Simpsons joke that turned out to be wrong. The misses are invisible. Only the hits circulate. And when you filter 800 episodes of satirical content through an engine that only surfaces accurate predictions, you end up with a highlight reel that looks like prophecy. But here is where the story gets genuinely interesting. Because while the debunking accounts for most of the phenomenon, there are a small number of cases that remain genuinely difficult to explain through trend extrapolation and coincidence alone. The Trump prediction did not just forecast that a celebrity might run for president. It specified Trump. It included visual details. The gold escalator descent that mirrors Trump's actual 2015 campaign announcement. The Siegfried and Roy episode did not just make a general joke about wild animals being dangerous. It depicted a white tiger attacking one of the performers in a way that closely resembles what actually happened in 2003. The Cypress Hill gag is not a general observation about surprising music collaborations. It is a specific pairing that then actually occurred. These cases are harder to dismiss as pure statistical coincidence. They are specific in ways that go beyond trend extrapolation. And they are the foundation for the most interesting interpretation of the entire phenomenon, one that has nothing to do with conspiracy or prophecy. The Simpsons shapes the future, not through magic, not through access to hidden information, through cultural influence. The show is one of the most watched, most quoted, most culturally embedded pieces of American media in history. It has been running for longer than most of its current audience has been alive. Its jokes have become part of how Americans talk about their own culture. Its observations have become reference points that people use to process new events. When The Simpsons makes a joke about something, that joke enters the cultural bloodstream at an enormous scale. Millions of people see it. It becomes part of how they think about that thing. It makes the thing feel familiar and, in some cases, makes certain outcomes feel inevitable or at least imaginable in ways they might not have otherwise. The Trump joke did not predict the Trump presidency, but it made the concept of a Trump presidency feel like a familiar kind of absurdity rather than an unthinkable one. It primed the cultural imagination. It gave people a frame of reference. When Trump announced his candidacy in 2015, one of the first things that circulated online was the Simpsons clip. The joke from 2000 was not a prophecy. It was a preview that made the reality feel like a punchline people had already heard, a joke arriving at its conclusion rather than a shock arriving from nowhere. The Disney acquisition joke did not predict the merger. The Disney-Fox merger was the result of business dynamics that had been building for years, but the joke made the idea feel like an inevitability that smart observers had already grasped. When it happened, the response was not surprise. The response was recognition. Of course this happened. The Simpsons already told us it would. The joke made the prediction feel retroactively correct in a way that had more to do with cultural framing than with actual foresight. The Simpsons did not predict the future. The Simpsons wrote so many possible futures across so many episodes, across such a long span of time, that some of them were certain to materialize. And the ones that materialized are the only ones anyone remembers. The rest dissolve into the enormous volume of content that produced them. But try telling that to yourself the next time a Simpsons clip from 1,995 lines up with a headline from today. Because even knowing how the mechanism works, even understanding the statistics and the confirmation bias and the cultural influence, it is still remarkable to watch. 800 episodes, 36 years, Thousands of observations about the trajectory of American culture. Enough bullseyes to make even the people who write the show occasionally pause and wonder if they know something they should not. Springfield is not a prediction of where America was headed. Springfield is a diagnosis of where America already was. The show just wrote it down, and we have been living inside the description ever since. Section 9. Where is Springfield? The town that exists everywhere. Springfield is the most famous fictional town in American cultural history. More people can identify Springfield than can name the capital of many actual American states. They know its layout. They know its landmarks. They know the power plant and the school and the bar and the tire fire and the gorge. Springfield has been in their lives longer than many real places they have actually visited, and nobody knows where it is. This is the show's most sustained and deliberate joke. A single geographic fact maintained in a state of perfect ambiguity across 36 seasons and nearly 800 episodes, preserved through an elaborate and ongoing system of contradictions and misdirections that has prevented any definitive answer from ever holding for longer than a few days. Springfield borders Ohio in one episode and Nevada in another. It is on the coast in certain episodes and landlocked in others. It has access to mountains and oceans and deserts and forests and farmland and something that looks like the Canadian border and something that looks like the Gulf of Mexico, all within driving distance, all apparently accessible in the course of a normal weekend. Its weather ranges from blizzard conditions to tropical heat waves within a single calendar year. Its geography is physically impossible for any single American location to possess. The show has been deliberately contradicting its own clues for its entire run. Every time an episode appears to narrow down the possibilities, a subsequent episode introduces a new detail that renders the previous conclusion invalid. Lisa's area code has been shown as a Missouri exchange. The state abbreviation has been shown as NT, which corresponds to no American state. At one point, Homer calling the state capital reaches a voice that identifies the state as one beginning with a vowel, which eliminates some possibilities while leaving far too many others viable. The sun has been shown setting in the wrong direction relative to the coastline that is supposedly nearby. Springfield has been placed north, south, east, and west of every bordering state it has supposedly bordered. Matt Groening, the show's creator, addressed this in 2012 in an interview with Smithsonian Magazine. He admitted what many had long suspected, that he named the town Springfield partly because it is one of the most common city names in America, present in an enormous number of states, and partly because he grew up near Springfield, Oregon. For approximately 48 hours, this felt like a definitive answer. Springfield was in Oregon, the mystery was solved, and then the show continued contradicting this. Episodes aired after the interview that placed Springfield in geographic contexts completely inconsistent with Oregon. The writers did not honor Groening's disclosure. They kept the ambiguity alive because the ambiguity was the point. At the surface level, the geographic impossibility serves an artistic function that Groening and the show's writers have always been transparent about. Springfield is designed to be universal. It is not meant to be a specific place in a specific state with a specific set of regional characteristics. It is meant to feel like the town the viewer grew up in, wherever that town was. It is a composite of every American community that has ever existed, assembled from pieces of Rust Belt, industrial decline, and Sunbelt suburban sprawl, and small-town insularity, and Midwest cultural blankness. It is everywhere, because its job is to feel familiar to everyone. This is a real and valid explanation. It is the intentional design philosophy. But under the theories we have been exploring throughout this journey, Springfield's geographic impossibility takes on additional dimensions that the surface-level explanation does not touch. If the radiation theory is correct, if the physical and biological laws of Springfield have been genuinely warped by decades of nuclear contamination, there is no particular reason why geography should be exempt from the warping. If the residents of Springfield can have 4 fingers and yellow skin and survive injuries that would kill anyone in the real world, why should the town itself be bound by the geographic constraints that govern real American locations? Maybe Springfield has both mountains and oceans because the contamination does not just affect biology. Maybe it affects the physical landscape. Maybe the radiation has compressed and distorted the space around Springfield in ways that bring geographic features together that have no business being neighbors. If the coma theory is correct, Springfield's geography makes even more immediate sense. Homer's unconscious mind does not contain a precise map of America. It contains impressions, fragments, emotional memories of places he has been or seen or heard described, mountains from a childhood vacation, an ocean from a movie he once saw, a desert from a road trip with Marge, farmland glimpsed from a car window on a drive he barely remembers. His dreaming brain assembled Springfield from every American landscape it had ever encountered, layering them on top of each other without reference to geographic logic, because dreams do not operate by geographic logic. Dreams operate by emotional logic. And Springfield feels like America because it is made from Homer's memory of America, which is scattered and incomplete and held together by feeling rather than fact. The principle and the Popper theory offers a darker interpretation still. If Springfield operates through collective denial and the systematic suppression of any truth that threatens the community's comfortable fiction, then the town's refusal to have a fixed location is the ultimate expression of that denial extended to geography. You cannot investigate a town you cannot find. You cannot bring federal enforcement action against a facility if the state it is located in changes depending on the episode. You cannot hold anyone accountable for anything if the jurisdiction is perpetually undefined. Springfield floats between states because floating is safer than landing. Landing means accountability. Landing means someone shows up with a legal brief and a regulatory authority and starts asking questions about the three-eyed fish and the cracked cooling towers and the 140-year-old man who glows in. The darkened signs the paychecks. As long as the state line cannot be definitively established, the oversight body with jurisdiction is uncertain. As long as the jurisdiction is uncertain, the enforcement mechanism is unclear. And as long as the enforcement mechanism is unclear, Burns keeps operating. The show gave a definitive answer once. In the episode Behind the Laughter, the mockumentary episode from the 12th season, Springfield's location is finally stated explicitly. The original broadcast placed the family in northern Kentucky, and then, in syndicated reruns, the location was changed to a different state entirely. The answer literally depends on which version of the episode you are watching. The show gave you the truth and then retroactively changed the truth based on the distribution platform. Even when Springfield has an official location, that location is not reliable. It shifts. It mutates. It refuses to be pinned down. Exactly like everything else in this town, every American state has been theorized as Springfield's home. The theories that support each candidate are real. The evidence against each candidate is equally real. The show has constructed a system in which every candidate has something pointing toward it and something pointing away from it. A system designed to be permanently indeterminate. Springfield will never be definitively located, not because the show cannot decide, but because the show decided long ago that Springfield is more valuable as a mystery than as an answer. A town that could be anywhere is a town that belongs to everyone, and a town that belongs to everyone is a town that cannot be shut down, investigated, regulated, or held accountable by any single authority. It is, in the most literal sense, beyond jurisdiction. Section 10. Hans Moleman, Ned Flanders, and Springfield's Forgotten Souls. Not every mystery in The Simpsons is grand in scale. Some of them are smaller and stranger, tucked into the background of the show where they can be observed but not quite focused on. Two of the most interesting are characters the show has used in very specific ways across decades of episodes. Characters whose situations, when examined carefully, reveal something about the nature of Springfield that the larger theories only gesture toward. The first is Hans Moleman. If you have watched The Simpsons for any length of time, you know Hans Moleman. He is tiny and ancient-looking, nearly blind, shuffling through the background of Springfield scenes with a defeated posture that suggests someone who has accepted the worst and has stopped being surprised by it. He is most famous for one thing. He dies constantly. Hans Moleman has been killed, in canonical regular episodes rather than in dream sequences or Halloween specials, more times than any other character in the history of American animation. He gets hit by cars. He gets crushed by falling objects. He gets buried alive. He gets eaten. He gets struck by lightning. He gets set on fire. He walks into traffic and does not come out the other side. He survives explosives at close range only in the sense that he appears in the next scene without any evidence of the explosives, not because anything about the explosion spared him. And then he shows up in the next episode. Completely whole, no explanation. No resurrection scene. No acknowledgement that he was killed several episodes ago. He is simply there again, ready for the next thing to happen to him. Most viewers accept this as a running gag. Mulman dies a lot. It is funny. Move on. But under the framework of the theories we have been building through this entire exploration, Mulman's repeated deaths are genuinely strange in ways that a casual laugh does not resolve. If the radiation theory is true, Mulman represents the most extreme case of biological mutation in Springfield. Not a mutation that altered his appearance in the ways Homer and Marge and the others have been altered, but a mutation that has done something to his cellular biology so fundamentally that death itself has become temporary for him. He does not survive his deaths the way Homer survives injuries. Homer endures damage and heals. Mulman actually dies. His body ceases to function. And then it does not cease to function, because whatever the power plant has done to his cellular structure has given his biology a capacity for regeneration that sits well outside anything medical science can currently explain. If the coma theory is true, Mulman functions differently. He is a background process in Homer's dream, a character that Homer's unconscious mind does not have strong enough feelings about to maintain with any consistency. Mulman dies because Homer's dreaming brain occasionally lets minor characters lapse, and he returns because the dream requires a certain number of bodies to make Springfield feel populated. He is furniture that the dream breaks and reassembles because the scene requires his presence, not because the dream cares specifically about his continuity. If the collective denial theory is true, Mulman's deaths are simply another thing Springfield has agreed not to notice. A man dies publicly, visibly, in front of witnesses, repeatedly, and nobody investigates. Nobody asks how he keeps returning. Nobody raises the question that his continued existence after repeated deaths implies about the nature of life and death in Springfield. The town has normalized this the way it has normalized everything else that should be alarming. The three-eyed fish, the billionaire who glows in the dark, the baby who shot a man, and now an old man who dies every few weeks and shows up again for more. There is one detail about Mulman that deserves specific attention. At one point in the show, Mulman states his age as 31. He says it casually, without apparent awareness of how strange the claim is. Look at the man making this claim. He appears to be in his 80s at minimum. He is deeply wrinkled. His posture is the posture of someone whose body has been carrying weight for decades beyond what 31 years would produce. His eyesight is almost completely gone. Everything about his physical presentation says old in a way that 31 does not account for. If Mulman is telling the truth, something happened to him. Something aged him catastrophically at a rate that no biological process should allow. Something took a man in the middle of his life and accelerated his physical deterioration to such a degree that he appears to be 5 decades older than he is. Something also made him nearly indestructible despite the frailty that same accelerated aging has produced. The radiation theory has a coherent explanation for both of these things. Chronic, intense radiation exposure can cause the kind of accelerated cellular degradation that manifests as premature aging. And if that same exposure also caused the kind of deep cellular mutation that allows Mulman to reconstitute himself after fatal trauma, then you have a person who aged to apparent elderliness at 31 and who cannot permanently die. That is a terrible thing to be. And the show, to its credit, plays Mulman not as comic relief exactly, but as something closer to a figure of quiet existential suffering. He is not happy. He is not celebrated. He is simply there, enduring, showing up, absorbing whatever comes next. The only theory that does not have an answer for Mulman is the one that says The Simpsons is just a cartoon and none of it needs to mean anything. Now let us talk about Ned Flanders, because Ned is a character the show has been quietly and thoroughly destroying for 3 decades, and the darkness hiding behind his relentless, impossible niceness is one of the most unsettling subtexts in the entire series. On the surface, Ned Flanders is everything Homer Simpson is not. He is patient, he is generous, he is devoutly religious in a way that the show treats as genuine rather than satirical. He is physically fit, financially responsible, a good father to his sons Rod and Todd, and a consistently supportive neighbor to a family that has given him very little reason to be supportive. He is, by any objective measure, a better person than Homer in virtually every way the show defines goodness, and Springfield punishes him for this relentlessly. Maud Flanders, Ned's wife, was killed by a t-shirt cannon, The details of this event are important. A t-shirt cannon at a racing event misfired because Homer was dodging the shirts. The shirts hit Maude instead. She fell from the bleachers and died. Homer's selfishness, his reflexive, immediate, completely characteristic self-interest, directly caused the death of his neighbor's wife, and Ned forgave him, because that is who Ned is. He forgives. When a hurricane destroys Ned's house and the community rallies to rebuild it, the result is structurally unsound in ways that cause it to collapse almost immediately after completion. The house is gone. Ned loses everything a second time. And in the aftermath of this second loss, something breaks in Ned Flanders. He has a complete psychological collapse. He screams at the town. He says things he has held inside for decades. He insults, one by one, every person who has wronged him across years of patient tolerance. He says everything he has never been able to say, and then he is hospitalized. The psychiatric evaluation that follows reveals something the show has been building toward without fully announcing. Ned's relentless niceness is not natural. It is not a character trait that emerged from his values or his faith. It is the result of childhood behavioral modification. Ned was a violent and uncontrollable child. His parents, being people who did not believe in conventional discipline, took him to a psychiatrist when he was young. The psychiatrist spent years conditioning the aggression out of him. Through a sustained program of behavioral modification, the rage that lived in young Ned was systematically suppressed until the conditioned behavior became so deeply embedded that Ned himself had forgotten it was conditioned. His niceness is not who he is. It is a cage built around who he actually is, constructed in his childhood and maintained through decades of programmed habit. Everything about Ned reads differently once you understand this. His patience with Homer is not saintly, it is pathological. He cannot express anger because his brain was wired in childhood to suppress anger at all costs. The conditioning runs deeper than conscious decision. It is not a choice Ned makes. It is a reflex he cannot override. His faith is real, but it serves a specific function. It provides a framework through which Ned can interpret his suffering as meaningful rather than pointless. Without the framework that faith provides, the accumulation of loss and unfairness and unreciprocated goodness that characterizes Ned's life would be unendurable. Faith is the story that makes the suffering bearable. His forgiveness of Homer after Maude's death is the most unsettling element of this reread. Homer's selfishness killed Ned's wife. By any reasonable standard, rage would be an appropriate response. Grief and rage together. The kind of response a person has when they lose something irreplaceable through someone else's thoughtlessness. But Ned cannot have that response. The conditioning will not allow it. So, he forgives. Because forgiveness is what the program produces when the input is loss. The show knows what it is doing with this. It has shown us what happens when the conditioning fails. When Ned snaps after the hurricane and the collapsing house, the person who emerges is not violent, exactly, but the despair is bottomless. The rage is underneath it, deep and old and very large. And the show implies, carefully, that the only reason Ned has never done anything with that rage is that the programming has been working continuously since his childhood to prevent it from reaching the surface. Ned Flanders is a man who has spent his entire adult life performing goodness because the alternative, the person he was conditioned away from being, is someone that neither he nor Springfield can afford to release. And the darkest piece of Ned's story is the one that sits at the intersection of his faith and the show's established theology. The Simpsons has a god, not metaphorically. The show has depicted God as an actual character who appears and speaks and interacts with the residents of Springfield. Homer has spoken with God twice in face-to-face conversations. God told Homer that his time was coming. God has engaged with Homer in ways that suggest a genuine relationship, or at least a genuine awareness. God has never spoken to Ned Flanders. Ned goes to church every Sunday. He prays regularly and with evident sincerity. He structures his life around his faith in a way that Homer, who sleeps through church and treats religion as an inconvenient social obligation, demonstrably does not. By any reasonable theological standard, Ned is the man God should be talking to. He is the man whose faith has been tested and has held. He is the man who has done everything right, who has given everything asked of him, who has kept coming back after each loss with his belief intact. And God talks to Homer. God ignores Ned. The drunk who falls asleep in church gets divine conversation. The devout man who has given his entire life to faith gets silence. This is not random cruelty on the show's part. It is a thesis statement. The Simpsons is telling you, through this specific and consistent pattern, that goodness is not rewarded in Springfield. That the system, whatever its nature, whether it is Burns's empire, or the radiation, or the coma, or the collective denial of the town, does not care about moral behavior. It cares about compliance. And Ned is the most compliant man in town. He was programmed to be compliant before he was old enough to choose. And his reward, his entire reward across 36 years of demonstrated virtue, is a dead wife, a house that keeps falling down, a neighbor who will never appreciate him, and a God who shows up in the dreams of the man next door. Ned Flanders is what happens when you do everything right in a system that does not reward rightness. Homer Simpson is what happens when you do everything wrong in a system that does not punish wrongness. They live next door to each other. They have lived next door to each other for 36 years. And the gap between them, the gap between effort and reward, between virtue and consequence, has never closed. Because in Springfield, the gap is not supposed to close. The system is not designed to close it. The system is designed to keep everyone exactly where they are. Consider the full weight of what the show has established about the theology of Springfield. God exists in this universe. The show makes this explicit and clear. God is not a metaphor or a cultural reference. God is an actual character who has appeared to Homer, who has spoken with Homer, who has given Homer specific and personal guidance about the direction of his life. God told Homer his time was coming. God had a full conversation with Homer about the meaning of life. God appeared to Homer in the Season 4 premiere and treated the interaction as something routine. And Ned Flanders, who has organized his entire existence around his relationship with God, who attends church without fail and prays with evident sincerity and structures every decision he makes around the framework his faith provides, has never received a single word from the God who casually dropped by Homer's living room to chat. The implication, once you sit with it, is devastating in a very specific way. In Springfield's theology, the divine does not discriminate on the basis of merit. God does not prefer the devout over the indifferent. God does not reward the careful cultivation of a spiritual practice across decades of sustained commitment and genuine loss. God appears where God appears, and God has appeared to Homer Simpson repeatedly, while Ned Flanders kneels in the same church every Sunday and receives nothing but the echo of his own prayers. If you believed, as Ned believes, that God has a plan, and that the suffering you experience in service of living by that plan will eventually be redeemed, and then you discovered that the God in question has been having casual conversations with your neighbor, the man whose selfishness caused your wife's death, the man who sleeps through services and treats faith as a social inconvenience, what would that do to you? The show does not answer this. But the question hangs in the air over every subsequent episode involving Ned and his faith. God loves Springfield. God just loves it in ways that do not correspond to any framework of divine fairness. And Ned Flanders, the most faithful man in the contamination zone, continues showing up every Sunday to a church whose God prefers the company of his neighbor. That is perhaps the darkest truth in all of Springfield. Not the radiation, not the coma, not the cover-up. The fact that in this universe God exists and is accessible, and the person most actively seeking access has been waiting, quietly and faithfully, for 36 years, while the person least invested in the relationship keeps being chosen. Ned keeps going to church. He keeps praying. He keeps finding the next thing to be grateful for, the next suffering to interpret as meaningful, the next loss to absorb. And the God who could tell him he is seen and valued has chosen instead to appear to Homer. Again, Mollaman in the ground, Ned at the church, Burns at the top, Homer at the plant. And the loop keeps running. Section 11. The floating timeline and what it says about America. We have arrived at the last mystery. The one that sits at the center of everything we have discussed tonight. The way a drain sits at the center of a sink. Every theory, every dark truth, every buried storyline, everything we have explored across these hours in Springfield eventually flows toward this. Nobody ages. Bart Simpson was 10 years old when the show debuted on the 17th of December, 1989. He is 10 years old right now, in 2025. Lisa was 8 then. She is 8 now. Maggie was 1. Maggie remains 1. Homer and Marge were roughly in their mid-30s when the show began. Their mid-30s is where they still live. 36 years have passed in the world. 0 years have passed in Springfield. The characters exist in a permanent present tense, locked at their original ages, living through decades of cultural change without adding a single candle to their birthday cakes. The industry term is floating timeline. It means the show's present is always the viewer's present. When the episode airs in 2025, the characters are living in 2025. When it aired in 1995, they were living in 1995. The cultural references update, the technology updates, the jokes reference whatever is happening in the world at the moment of production. But the people do not change. They remain frozen at the ages they occupied when the show began, experiencing an endless present that never becomes a past. Long-running animated shows do this by convention. It is an industry standard rather than a choice specific to The Simpsons. The logistics of aging characters across decades of production would create enormous narrative complications, and the tradition of the medium is to simply not acknowledge the passage of time for recurring characters. Most viewers accept this without question. It is simply how these shows work. But The Simpsons has been running long enough, and the contradictions it has generated through its floating timeline are now large enough that accepting it uncritically has become genuinely difficult. The most obvious structural problem is the backstory. When the show began, Homer and Marge's history was grounded in the 1970s and early 1980s. They met in high school, they fell in love, they had Bart. Their courtship was set during a specific era with specific cultural markers, music and fashion and political context that made sense for people in their mid-30s in the late 1980s. Homer's hair, Marge's prom dress, the details of their early relationship, all of it placed them in a recognizable historical moment. But the floating timeline cannot hold that backstory in place. If Homer and Marge are still in their mid-30s in 2025, then they could not have met in 1980. They met in approximately 2005 or 2006. Their high school experience was not shaped by Watergate and disco. It was shaped by social media's early years and whatever music was playing in 2003. The cultural context of their youth has been completely different from what the show originally established. The show has addressed this through revision. In flashback episodes from later seasons, Homer and Marge's formative years have been rewritten to be consistent with whatever decade their current ages would place those years in. They were hippies in early episodes. Then they were children of the grunge era. Then they were defined by the late 90s and early 2000s. Then they were millennials who came of age during a period that the original show was already on the air during. Their origin story has been told and retold multiple times, each version placing their youth in a different decade, each version internally consistent with the episode that contains it, and inconsistent with the episodes that came before. Homer and Marge do not have a fixed past. They have an approximation of a past that is continuously revised to obtain the illusion of a permanent present. Their history is rewritten every few years. Their memories are unstable. Their origin is a draft that is perpetually in revision. Every theory we have explored tonight has something to say about this. The coma theory says nobody ages because they exist inside the frozen mind of an unconscious man. Homer went to sleep in April of 1993 with a specific picture of his family, and that picture has not changed because the mind holding it has not been receiving new information. His children cannot age in the dream because Homer did not observe them aging. His wife cannot change because the last time he saw her, she was exactly as the show depicts her. The floating timeline is not a narrative convention in this reading. It is the internal logic of a coma dream, which can only work with the material it had at the moment of onset. The radiation theory says nobody ages because the biological mutation caused by chronic radiation exposure has altered the aging process at the cellular level. The contamination has not just affected cognition and physical appearance, it has affected time's passage within biological systems. The residents of Springfield do not age because the same poison that changed the color of their skin and the shape of their eyes has also changed the mechanism by which their cells deteriorate across time. They are not immortal. They are suspended. The radiation holds them in a kind of biological stasis that prevents the usual markers of time's passage from accumulating. The collective denial theory says nobody ages because Springfield has agreed not to notice. The town has a demonstrated capacity for voting to maintain comfortable lies over inconvenient truths. The truth that time passes and people get older is one of the most uncomfortable truths available. If you can vote to make it illegal to mention that your principal is an imposter, you can certainly vote to maintain the fiction that the children are still young and the parents are still vigorous. The floating timeline is simply the most fundamental and pervasive application of Springfield's denial mechanism. The show has imagined its characters aging. It has done this several times. The most extended and emotionally rich of these moments is the season 6 episode Lisa's Wedding, which depicts a flash forward to Lisa as a 23-year-old woman, engaged and living in England, returning to Springfield for her wedding. The future the episode creates is detailed and specific and genuinely moving. Lisa has grown up. She has become the person the show has always suggested she would become. She is brilliant and principled and slightly lonely and still searching for a connection to the world that the world has never quite made easy for her. The episode proves definitively that the show can imagine its characters as adults. It can tell stories about who they would become if time were allowed to pass. It can envision their futures with emotional specificity and narrative richness. After the episode ends, Lisa returns to being 8 years old. The future is locked away. The glimpse closes. And the permanent present resumes as if the flash forward never happened. The show can imagine growth. It chooses not to allow it. It peeks through the window and then closes the shutter. Now here is the dimension of the floating timeline that reaches beyond the show itself. The one that says something about the relationship between the audience and what the audience needs from this show. The Simpsons is the American family. They have held that position for longer than any other fictional household in the history of the medium. The family on Evergreen Terrace has been the reference point for what an American family looks like, in all its dysfunction and love and chaos and resilience, for longer than most of the show's current viewers have been alive. And the American family, as The Simpsons depicts it, cannot be allowed to change. Not because the show lacks the courage to age its characters, but because we, the audience, cannot afford for it to change. Homer must always be the embarrassing, lovable, infuriating, strangely moving middle-aged dad. Marge must always be the patient, sustaining, occasionally overlooked center of the household. Bart must always be the rebellious spirit who breaks the rules but comes home in the end. Lisa must always be the idealist who believes the world can be better. Maggie must always be the mysterious silence at the center of it all. The dynamic must be preserved. The structure must hold. Because the moment the Simpson family ages, the moment Bart goes to college and Lisa moves away and Maggie starts speaking and Homer retires, the show stops being a comedy. It becomes an elegy. It becomes the story of a family that ran out of time, and America does not want that story. America wants the version where the kids are always young and the parents are always together and the house always looks the same and the beer is always cold and the couch gag always plays and nobody ever has to say goodbye. We are the ones who built the loop. The floating timeline is not something the show imposed on the audience. It is something the audience required of the show. We pressed pause in 1989, and we never pressed play. We demanded that this family stay exactly as we found them, because letting them change meant acknowledging that we had changed, that the years had passed, that the couch we sat on as children while watching this show is gone now, or in someone else's house, or in a landfill somewhere, and we are not the people who sat on it anymore. As long as The Simpsons is on, as long as Bart is 10 and Lisa is 8, and Homer is stumbling through the door at 5:30 after another day at the plant, we do not have to acknowledge any of that. We can sit down and turn on the television and return to the family that never changes in the town, that never ages in the show, that never ends. The loop is not their prison. It is ours. We built it. We maintain it. And every time we watch, every time we laugh, every time we quote a line from an episode that aired before most of us could read, we make the walls a little stronger and the exit a little harder to find. Because if they escape, if the timeline stops floating and starts landing, if Bart turns 11 and Lisa turns 9 and Maggie finally says her second word, and Homer looks in the mirror one morning and sees that 36 years have actually passed, then the show ends. And the show ending means admitting that the version of America The Simpsons represents, the chaotic, resilient, perpetually optimistic, frequently embarrassing, deeply loving version of the middle-class American family, was always temporary. was always just one birthday away from dissolving into something we do not recognize and cannot hold. The Simpsons are trapped in a loop because we trapped them there, and we are not ready to let them go. Not because we love the show, though we do. Not because it is good television, though it is or was. But because letting The Simpsons age means letting ourselves age. It means letting the Sunday nights of childhood become Sunday nights of middle age, become Sunday nights of something later still. It means admitting that time has passed for us, even if it has not passed for them. So the loop keeps running, and Bart stays 10, and Lisa stays 8, and Homer keeps coming home from the plant to the family on Evergreen Terrace, and Springfield keeps resetting, and Burns keeps surviving, and the radiation keeps leaking, and the dream keeps dreaming, and we keep watching. Because as long as we keep watching, Springfield is still there. The family is still together. The house is still standing. And we can still go home to a place that has not changed, in a town that cannot change, watching people who will never grow old, in a show that has decided, on our behalf, that some things should be allowed to last forever. That is The Simpsons. That is all of it. The radiation, and the coma, and the shooter, and the immortal billionaire, and the smartest baby, and the radical mother, and the predictions, and the impossible geography, and the dead man who keeps showing up for more, and the kindest man in town being ignored by the God he has given everything to, and the family that will not age because we will not let them. Every mystery, every dark truth, every buried thread. All of it comes back to the same place, a house on Evergreen Terrace, a family inside it, and an audience outside pressing their faces to the glass, watching the light in the windows and feeling something they cannot quite name, but know they would rather feel than not. That is what Springfield is. That is what it has always been. Not a contamination zone, not a coma dream, not a cover-up, not a prediction engine. All of those things, yes. But underneath all of them, in the space where the theories end and the feeling begins, it is a place we made because we needed somewhere to go that would always be there when we arrived. A town that never changes. A family that always waits. A show that never ends. Because some things, if you love them enough, can last as long as you need them to. Extended meditation. Moe's Tavern and the Geography of Despair. There is a bar in Springfield that has been open every night of every week for 36 years. It sits on a street that should, by any reasonable economic logic, not be able to sustain a bar. The surrounding neighborhood is working class at best and declining at worst. The clientele is a rotating cast of the same half-dozen regulars who have been drinking there for decades without apparent improvement in their circumstances or their outlook. The owner is a man whose emotional state ranges from resigned to actively miserable, whose romantic life has been a sustained series of catastrophic failures, and whose establishment has been destroyed, bankrupted, and threatened so many times across the show's history that its continued operation represents something closer to stubbornness than business acumen. Moe's Tavern is, in many ways, the emotional center of Springfield, in the same way that the nuclear plant is the economic center. It is the place where the men of this town go when everything else is either unavailable or insufficient. It is the place where Homer has spent an enormous portion of his adult life, sitting on a stool with a beer in his hand and his problems held at arm's length by the specific anesthetic quality of a bar at a particular time of day. It is the place where Barney Gumble has been dissolving slowly for decades, one pint at a time, in a process so gradual and so complete that the town has simply accepted it as his natural condition rather than as the ongoing emergency it actually is. And if you look at Moe's Tavern through the lens of the radiation theory, it reveals something that the show has been building quietly across its entire run. Moe's is full of men whose cognitive function has been compromised, not in the dramatic and immediately visible way that Homer's impairment expresses itself, but in subtler and more specifically, social ways. The regulars at Moe's are people who have been unable to build the kind of lives that their younger selves presumably imagined for themselves. They have found a place where that gap between aspiration and reality can be managed through the social warmth of familiar company and the chemical warmth of alcohol. They sit at those stools because the stools are comfortable and the company is known and the beer is cold, and the alternative is going home to something that requires more from them than they currently feel equipped to give. This is recognizable. It is the texture of a particular kind of adult male loneliness that the show has depicted with real accuracy and real compassion underneath the comedy. But it is also, through the radiation theory's lens, a portrait of a population that has been systematically deprived of the cognitive and emotional resources it would need to make different choices. The men at Moe's are not there because they are weak or lazy or morally deficient. They are there because the environment has taken something from them, something in their capacity for sustained hope or sustained effort, and the bar is what remains when that capacity has been diminished. Moe himself is the most interesting case in this context. He is not stupid. The show has established this in various episodes where he displays unexpected depth, unexpected insight, unexpected emotional intelligence. He knows what he is. He knows what the bar is. He has moments of clarity about his situation that are more piercing than anything Homer ever articulates. And then the clarity passes, and he goes back behind the bar, and the next regular comes in, and the cycle continues. Moe's Tavern is the place Springfield goes when it is done pretending, when the effort of maintaining the town's collective fiction has become temporarily too expensive. When the weight of knowing what you know without being able to say, it becomes heavy enough that you need somewhere to put it down for a few hours. The bar is the place where Springfield's denial gets its relief, where the pressure that builds from living inside the lie gets vented just enough to make the lie sustainable for another day. Homer understands this intuitively, the way he understands most things, not through articulation but through instinct. He goes to Moe's not just to drink, but to be in a place where nothing is required of him, where he does not have to be the safety inspector or the father or the husband or the employee, where he can simply exist for a few hours in the company of other men who are also simply existing, where the gap between who he is and who he was supposed to be is not only acceptable but shared. This is the gift that Moe's Tavern gives Springfield. Not alcohol, exactly. The suspension of the expectation of being more than you currently are. And in a town that has been asking its residents to maintain an enormous and exhausting collective fiction for 36 years, that suspension is not a luxury. It is a necessity. The tragedy of Moe's Tavern is that the relief it provides makes the situation sustainable that it should probably not be sustaining. By giving Springfield somewhere to put the pressure down, somewhere to rest from the effort of being complicit in the town's denial, it enables the denial to continue. The bar is both the symptom and the coping mechanism, the product of the system and the thing that keeps the system running. Every stool at Moe's bar is occupied by someone who knows more than they are saying. Every drink poured is a small act of maintenance, keeping the system functional for another round. Extended meditation. What Burns knew and when he knew it. There is a version of the Burns story that the show gestures toward but never fully tells, and it is darker than anything we have covered so far. It is the story of a man who understood exactly what he was doing from the very beginning, who had full knowledge of the consequences of his actions, and who made every decision he made with that knowledge in hand. Burns did not stumble into the situation that Springfield finds itself in. He did not build a flawed plant out of ignorance or corner-cut his way into a contamination crisis through carelessness. Burns is the most intelligent character in Springfield by a wide margin. The show establishes this consistently across hundreds of episodes. He is strategically ruthless in ways that require sustained cognitive sophistication. He manipulates municipal politics. He corrupts institutional frameworks. He outmaneuvers opponents who believe they are operating from a position of strength. He has maintained his empire for over a century through a continuous application of intelligence, resources, and absolutely uncompromising self-interest. A man with those capabilities does not accidentally create a contamination zone. He creates it deliberately or he creates it knowingly. And the show offers evidence that Burns understood the effects of radiation on biological systems long before the effects on Springfield's population became visible to anyone else, because Burns had been managing those effects in his own body for decades before Blinky ever turned up in the river with his third eye blinking. Think about the sequence of events. Burns has been managing his own radiation exposure through weekly treatments for an extended period that the show does not precisely define, but that clearly stretches back many decades. The treatments require sophisticated medical knowledge of radiation's biological effects. They require the ability to synthesize compounds that manage those effects. They require an understanding of dosing, timing, and biological response at a level that represents genuine scientific expertise. Burns did not acquire this knowledge accidentally. He acquired it through sustained engagement with the problem of radiation biology, driven by the very personal motivation of staying alive. This means that at the same time, Burns was operating a facility that was leaking radiation into Springfield's water supply, into the air above the town, into the soil and the river, and everything the residents touched and breathed and consumed. He possessed detailed and sophisticated knowledge of what radiation does to biological systems at the cellular level. He was not in the dark about the consequences. He was managing those consequences in his own body with precision and expertise. He knew. He has always known. The question is not whether Burns understood what the plant was doing to Springfield. The question is what he decided to do with that understanding. And the answer the show implies, through 36 years of accumulated evidence, is that he decided to do nothing to continue. To let the contamination proceed unaddressed because the contamination served his interests in ways that the expense of addressing it would have disrupted. A cognitively impaired population is easier to manage than a healthy one. This is not a subtle point. It does not require paranoid interpretation. A population whose critical thinking has been degraded by chronic neurological exposure is a population that is less likely to organize, less likely to challenge authority, less likely to notice the patterns in its own situation and respond to them effectively. The residents of Springfield have been demonstrating this for 36 years. They forget catastrophes. They accept impossible things as normal. They look at the evidence of their own contamination and reach for explanations that point anywhere except at the source. They are, in other words, exactly the kind of population that Burns needs to maintain his monopoly over their electricity, their economy, and their cognitive landscape. The plant is not just a power plant. It is a management system. And Burns is not just its owner. He is its operator, in both the industrial and the political sense of that word. He runs the reactor, and he runs the town, and the two functions are not separate. They are the same operation. This is the thought that makes the radiation theory something more than a fan theory about a cartoon. It is the thought that turns Springfield into a parable, about the relationship between industrial power and the communities that depend on it, about what happens when the entity responsible for your well-being is also the entity profiting from your incapacity, about the long, slow, invisible damage that accumulates in places where the person who could fix the problem has no incentive to do so and every incentive not to. The crayon in Homer's brain is Burns's power plant in miniature, something inserted into a system, something that diminishes capacity, something that makes the host more manageable and less capable of recognizing what is being done to them, and something that, once installed, is very difficult to remove. Not because removal is technically impossible, but because the system has arranged itself around its presence, and removing it causes a kind of clarity that the system cannot accommodate. Homer had the crayon removed. He saw clearly. He chose to put it back. Because clarity in Springfield is not sustainable. Because the gap between what Springfield is and what a clear-eyed person can see it to be is too wide to live in. Because the town was built by and for the fog. And the fog is the only thing that makes the town bearable for the people inside it. That is what Burns built. Not a power plant, a fog machine. The most sophisticated, most durable, most comprehensive fog machine in the history of American fiction. And it has been running without interruption since the 17th of December, 1989. Extended meditation. The Simpsons house as a living system. There is something worth noticing about the house at 742 Evergreen Terrace that is rarely discussed in the context of the show's mysteries, even though it sits at the center of every episode and has done so for 36 years. The house does not change. Not just in the sense that the characters do not age. The physical structure of the house, its layout, its furniture, its color palette, the particular arrangement of rooms and the way light falls through the windows at different times of day, all of it remains essentially identical from the show's first episode to its most recent. The couch in the living room has been in the same position for 36 years. The kitchen has the same table. The stairs have the same configuration. The bedrooms are where they have always been. This might seem like an obvious consequence of animation production economics. It is expensive and complicated to redesign a recurring environment. Keeping it consistent is practical. But the consistency of the house has an emotional quality that goes beyond practical necessity, and the show has leaned into that quality in ways that suggest it is intentional. The house is the one truly stable element in Springfield. In a town where institutions collapse and disasters erase what came before, where reality resets and memories fade, where the nuclear plant leaks and the denial runs deep and even the geography refuses to hold still, the house at 742 Evergreen Terrace is always there, exactly as it was, exactly as it will be, a fixed point in an environment that has no other fixed points. If the coma theory is true, this makes profound sense. Homer's unconscious mind returns to the house the way a dreaming mind returns to the most emotionally charged physical space in its memory. The house is not just where Homer lived, it is where Homer's family was. It is the container for everything he is trying to hold on to in the dream. The couch, the kitchen, the stairs, the rooms, all of it is preserved with the exactness that deep emotional memory preserves things. Not with the fading and distortion of ordinary memory, but with the crystalline precision of the things that matter most. The house is the dream's anchor. It is the place the unconscious mind keeps returning to, because it is the place where the family was real, where the love was visible and tangible, and located in specific pieces of furniture and specific walls, and a specific address that Homer could find with his eyes closed, even from inside a coma. Every episode, no matter what happens, ends with a return to the house. Homer always finds his way back to 742 Evergreen Terrace. No matter how far he travels, no matter how many adventures the dream generates, no matter how wild or surreal or physically impossible the events of the episode become, the story always finds its way back to that couch, that kitchen, those stairs. Because the house is what the dream is protecting. The house is what Homer is holding on to. Everything else is variation. The house is the constant, and if you have ever loved a place that is gone now, if you have ever had a home that no longer exists in the form it existed when you were inside it, you understand exactly what Homer's dream is doing. You understand the specific comfort and the specific grief of a mind that keeps returning to a place that only exists in memory, that insists on its presence, that refuses to let it dissolve. 742 Evergreen Terrace is not a TV set. It is a heart, and every episode is that heart beating. Extended meditation. Lisa and the weight of knowing. There is a conversation to be had about Lisa Simpson that is separate from her role in any of the specific theories we have discussed, though it connects to all of them. It is a conversation about what it costs to be the person who sees clearly in a place that has made not seeing the cornerstone of its social contract. Lisa is 8 years old. She has been 8 years old for 36 years. In that time, she has demonstrated an intellectual capacity that the show consistently presents as extraordinary, as something that sets her apart not just from her family but from virtually every adult in Springfield. She reads voraciously. She plays the saxophone with genuine feeling. She understands systems, political and environmental and social, in ways that grown people around her are unable to match. She is, by any reasonable measure, the most intelligent person in Springfield after Mr. Burns, and unlike Burns, she uses her intelligence in service of things that are good. And for 36 years, the show has been depicting what this costs her. Lisa is consistently lonely. Her intelligence isolates her from her peers because she cannot pretend to be less than she is, and being as much as she is makes her strange and difficult in environments that are designed for people operating closer to the median. She makes friends and loses them. She forms attachments to teachers and mentors who eventually leave or are taken from her. She cares about the world around her in ways that make her suffer for it. Because caring about something that is clearly going wrong and being unable to fix it is a particular kind of suffering, the kind that does not resolve or diminish with time. She is also right. This is what the show keeps establishing and what the show keeps failing to reward. Lisa is right about the environmental contamination. She is right about the corruption. She is right about the social injustices she identifies and argues against. She is right about the things that the adults around her dismiss or ignore. Her intelligence is not just a character trait. It is a form of moral clarity. She sees what is actually happening, and she says what she sees. And Springfield responds to this by making her life harder. The town does not punish Lisa through active cruelty, for the most part. It punishes her through indifference. By being exactly the kind of place that takes everything she offers, her intelligence, her effort, her commitment, her willingness to keep fighting even when fighting produces nothing, and returns nothing to her. She puts the energy in, The town absorbs it. And the town continues as it was before she spoke, as though she had said nothing. This is the specific cruelty of Lisa's situation. She is not fighting a villain. She is fighting a system. And systems do not have villains. They have structures. They have accumulated habits and self-reinforcing incentives and the kind of slow, organizational momentum that does not respond to a single clear voice saying true things. Lisa is a clear voice, saying true things in a town that has perfected the art of not hearing. Maggie watched this. We discussed Maggie's strategic silence, her decision to conceal her intelligence as a form of protection. But it is worth sitting with the specific influence that Lisa's example had on Maggie's choice. Maggie did not arrive at her silence through abstract reasoning. She arrived at it through observation of a specific case study. Her sister, her brilliant, committed, exhausted, perpetually disappointed sister, who has been fighting the right fights for 36 years and who has almost nothing to show for it. Maggie watched Lisa and learned something. She learned that in Springfield, visibility is vulnerability. That the more clearly you announce your capability, the more clearly the system can locate you and direct its indifference at you. That fighting loud produces less than fighting quiet. That the most effective way to accomplish something in this town is to accomplish it where nobody is watching. And so Maggie chose the pacifier over the voice, the observation over the declaration, the silence over the fight. She chose to be invisible because Lisa showed her what happens to those who are not. This is both a tribute to Maggie's intelligence and a quiet tragedy embedded in the Simpson family dynamic. The two most capable members of the family have adopted opposite strategies for surviving a town that was not built to accommodate their capabilities. Lisa fights and is ignored. Maggie hides and is overlooked. Both of them are protecting something that Springfield would diminish if it could see it clearly. Both of them are finding different ways to stay whole inside a system that would reduce them if given the chance. The show does not resolve this tension. It never will. Because resolving it would require Springfield to change, and Springfield does not change. It resets. It forgets. It continues. And Lisa keeps fighting and Maggie keeps watching, and the gap between what this town is and what it could be remains exactly as wide as it has always been. That gap is Lisa's life. She lives inside it. She has lived inside it for 36 years, and she has never stopped fighting to close it. That is the most extraordinary thing the show has ever depicted, more extraordinary than any of the mysteries or the theories or the dark truths. A child, 8 years old, fighting an unwinnable fight for 36 years without stopping. Not because she thinks she will win, because she cannot stop. Because stopping would mean becoming Springfield. And becoming Springfield is the one thing Lisa Simpson will not do. Extended meditation, Homer and Marge, the marriage that holds. Of all the relationships The Simpsons has depicted across 36 years, the one that is most consistently underestimated is the one at the show's center. Homer and Marge Simpson have been married for the entirety of the show's run. They were married before it began. They will presumably still be married if it ever ends. Their relationship has been tested in more ways than most television marriages are tested, and it has held. Not because it is easy or because they are perfectly suited to each other, but because they keep choosing it. The show has been honest about the difficulty of this choice in ways that most family sitcoms are not. Marge has been tempted to leave. Not as a cliffhanger plot device, but as a genuine exploration of what a person does when the life they are living falls short of the life they imagined. She has encountered men who offered her something Homer cannot. Intelligence without impairment. Reliability without volatility. Attention without the specific distraction of being Homer. She has stood at the edge of those alternatives and looked at them and turned back. Homer has failed her in so many small ways and several large ones that the running tally of his failures is itself a kind of portrait of how human beings actually disappoint the people they love. Not usually through dramatic betrayals, usually through the accumulated weight of small absences. The times you were there in body but not in attention. The times you chose the comfortable thing when the right thing was harder. The times you let the gap between who you meant to be and who you were showing up as go unaddressed for too long. And yet, the marriage holds. It holds because underneath the impairment and the failures and the accumulated small absences, Homer loves Marge in a way that the show depicts as completely genuine and completely extraordinary. He loves her with a devotion that his cognitive limitations cannot touch. The part of Homer that loves Marge operates independently of the part of Homer that forgets things and makes poor decisions and sleeps at his workstation. The love is not diminished by the impairment. It is perhaps the only thing in Homer that the impairment has not touched. There is an episode, one of the most quietly devastating in the series, in which Homer learns he has a genetic condition that will cause him to develop Alzheimer's disease. He looks at the diagnosis and his first thought is not for himself. His first thought is for Marge, for what it will mean for her, for the specific grief of watching a person you love lose themselves by degrees while their body continues present. He begins documenting things for her, recording himself, leaving evidence of who he is while he still knows who he is, so that she will have something to hold on to when he no longer can. The episode resolves in the show's typically imperfect way, with the diagnosis being questioned and the crisis being somewhat diffused. But what the episode revealed about Homer is indelible. Underneath the donut jokes and the strangling and the incompetence and the impairment, there is a man who understands love at a level that many more cognitively intact people never reach. He knows what Marge means. He knows what it would mean to lose the capacity to know it. And his response to that threat is to try to preserve, for her sake, the evidence of the person he has been, so that she will not have to mourn someone who left no record of themselves. That is Homer Simpson. That is the person underneath the IQ of 55 and the 342 safety violations and the crayon in the brain. That is what the radiation theory and the coma theory and all of the dark truths cannot fully account for, because they are frameworks for understanding what has been done to Homer from outside. They do not reach the thing that is inside him that the contamination could not touch. Marge sees this. This is why she stays. Not because she does not see his limitations, or because the marriage is always satisfying, or because her own desires and needs are fully met. She stays because she sees what is inside him, the genuine and unimpaired love, and she has decided that a life with that love inside it, even imperfectly expressed and often frustratingly contained within the limitations of the person expressing it, is the life she chooses. This is the emotional core the show has been protecting for 36 years. Not the jokes, not the celebrity cameos, not the theories or the mysteries or the dark truths. The specific and stubborn love between two very imperfect people who keep choosing each other. And if the coma theory is true, and all of this is Homer's dream, then this is what his unconscious mind has decided to dream about more than anything else. Not adventure, not success, not recognition. Marge, her patience and her love and the specific way she looks at him when she has decided to forgive him for something he did not quite deserve forgiveness for. That is what Homer is holding on to in his hospital bed. That is what his brain refuses to let go of. That is the dream worth dreaming. Extended meditation, the reset button, and the mercy of forgetting. We have discussed Springfield's collective denial at length, the mechanisms by which the town maintains its comfortable fiction, the vote, the decree, the exile of anyone who insists too loudly on the true version of events. But there is another way to think about the reset button that the show uses between episodes, one that is not about denial or dysfunction, but about something almost like mercy. Memory is heavy. The full accumulation of everything that has happened to you, held present and accessible at all times, would be crushing. Human psychology has built-in mechanisms for managing the weight of experience, for allowing certain things to fade, for creating enough distance between you and painful or overwhelming events that you can continue functioning. These mechanisms are not weaknesses. They are necessities. They are part of what makes it possible to get out of bed in the morning after things that should have made getting out of bed impossible. Springfield's reset has always been read as a failure, as evidence of lazy writing or convenient storytelling, or the show's unwillingness to deal with consequences. But what if it is something else? What if the reset is Springfield's version of the same psychological mercy that humans carry inside them? The capacity to not carry everything all the time? The ability to return to something like normal after things that should have permanently altered normal? Real communities do this. Real families do this. The weight of everything that has ever happened in a household does not press on every interaction that household has. The bad years are remembered but not constantly present. The crises that seemed unsurvivable become stories. The disasters that reorganized everything gradually recede into the background until they are part of the texture of the shared history, rather than the defining event of every present moment. Springfield's reset is extreme. It erases too much. It erases things that should be remembered and integrated rather than forgotten. The dome, the near misses with nuclear disaster, the moments when the contamination became visible enough that someone should have had to answer for it. Those erasures are the product of the system Burns built, the denial he requires in order to continue operating. But some of the reset, some of the return to normal, some of the capacity of this family and this town to wake up on Sunday morning after a Saturday that should have changed everything, and to find that things are more or less okay, is something else. It is the specific resilience of people who have decided to keep going, who have decided that the next episode is worth showing up for even after the previous one left things in a state that seemed unresolvable. The Simpsons are not resilient because they are written to be resilient. They are resilient because resilience is the one thing that radiation and coma dreams and collective denial and 36 years of impossible circumstances have not managed to take from them. They keep showing up. Homer keeps going to work. Marge keeps making dinner. Bart keeps making trouble. Lisa keeps arguing for something better. Maggie keeps watching. And next Sunday, they will all be back on that couch, watching the television, being a family in the same house on the same street in the same impossible town. That is not a failure of imagination. That is a declaration of intent. Springfield does not just persist despite everything that has been done to it. It persists because of the stubbornness of ordinary love. The love that cannot be contaminated or coma-dreamed or collectively denied out of existence. The love that shows up every week, regardless of what happened last week, and sits on the couch and watches the television and stays. The reset is not a cheat. The reset is a promise. We will be here next week. The family will still be intact. The house will still be standing. Whatever happened, whatever was broken, whatever felt permanent in its damage, we will come back from it and we will be here. That promise, made implicitly every time the credits roll and the theme plays, is the deepest thing The Simpsons has ever offered its audience. And it is the thing that has kept people coming back for 36 years. Not the jokes, not the mysteries, the promise. Extended meditation. The comedy and the grief. We have spent a long time tonight in the darker corners of Springfield, and it seems right, before we reach the end, to say something about the comedy, about why the show is funny. Because it is funny, often genuinely and brilliantly funny, and that funniness is not separate from the dark truths we have been discussing. It is the same thing wearing a different face. Comedy, at its core, is a way of surviving proximity to truth. It is the mechanism by which a mind that has seen something difficult or painful or frightening makes it survivable, not by diminishing the thing, but by finding the angle from which it can be looked at without being crushed by it. The best comedy is not escapism. It is engagement with the hardest things, but at an angle that allows you to keep breathing while you look at them. The Simpsons is funny because it is true. The things that make you laugh in this show are the things it has seen clearly. Homer's absurd incapacity and his genuine love for his family, the disconnect between Springfield's self-image and its actual situation, the specific texture of a life lived in modest circumstances with immodest hopes, Burns's theatrical villainy, which is funny precisely because it is recognizable, because every institution that has ever exploited a community for profit has a Burns at its center, and giving that figure a monocle and a centuries-old grudge makes him easier to see. The laughter is how the show gets you to look at things you might otherwise look away from. The Simpsons has been making you laugh about radiation and institutional corruption and cognitive impairment and the gap between the life you imagined and the life you are living for 36 years. And because it makes you laugh, you keep watching. And because you keep watching, it keeps showing you true things, and the true things accumulate, and the accumulation is what we have been exploring tonight. The grief is the other side of the coin. Because there is grief in this show, real and sustained grief, if you are paying the right kind of attention, the grief of Homer's coma if the theory is true, the grief of Mona Simpson's exile, the grief of Ned Flanders absorbing one loss after another in a town that does not protect the good, the grief of Lisa, fighting and fighting again, the grief of a family that cannot age, preserved at the moment their love was most vivid, never allowed to grow into whatever they might have become if time had been permitted to do its work. The comedy and the grief are not opposites. They are the same response to the same situation. They are both ways of saying, this is too large to hold. This is too strange to simply accept. This requires some kind of release, some mechanism for acknowledging its presence without being destroyed by it. The comedy is the release valve. The grief is what the valve is managing. The Simpsons has been managing this for 36 years, holding something enormous, something as large as the American experience of the late 20th and early 21st century, and finding the comedy in it and the grief in it and the love in it, all at once, in every episode, through every joke and every reset and every impossible event and every family reunion on that same couch. This is why the show has lasted. Not because the jokes are always good, though they often are, not because the animation is beautiful, though it is distinctive. Because the show has been sitting with something true for 36 years, and the people who watch it know it, even when they cannot articulate what they know. They feel the truth underneath the comedy. They feel the grief underneath the laughter. They feel the love underneath everything. And they keep coming back, every Sunday, every season, every decade, because Springfield is where the truth lives. The uncomfortable truth, the funny truth, the heartbreaking truth, all of it. And we cannot stop going back to a place where truth lives. Even if the truth is uncomfortable, even if the truth is that the fish have 3 eyes, and the water is bad, and the man who employs everyone has been alive for 140 years, and nobody is going to do anything about any of it. Even then, we go back. We sit down on the metaphorical couch, and we watch. Extended meditation. Bart Simpson and the performance of rebellion. Bart Simpson is 10 years old. He has been 10 years old for 36 years. In that time, he has been expelled from school more times than most people can count, has pulled pranks of escalating ambition and consequence, has confronted authority figures with an irreverence so consistent and so complete that it has become his defining character trait. He is the bad kid, the troublemaker, the one the teachers circle on their lists, the one the parents in the neighborhood keep an eye on. And underneath all of that, he is one of the most emotionally complex characters the show has ever built. The rebellion is real. Bart's resistance to authority, his compulsive need to push back against the structures that Springfield imposes on him, is not an act. It is a genuine expression of something in his character that the environment he lives in genuinely activates. He is in a school that underserves him, taught by teachers who have largely stopped expecting anything from him, living in a town that has decided what kind of person he is going to be, and arranged its responses to him accordingly. His rebellion is not irrational. It is the response of a person who understands, at some level below articulation, that the expectations being imposed on him are not serving his actual development, and who has found the only form of agency available to him in that situation. But the rebellion is also a performance. A carefully maintained persona that Bart uses to manage the gap between who the town has decided he is and who he might actually be if given the conditions to find out. The show has cracked this persona open in several episodes, usually quietly, usually in the second half of an episode after the comedy of the first half has done its work. Bart alone. Bart without the audience of peers whose expectations his persona is partly designed for. Bart in a moment where the performance is not required because nobody is watching. In those moments, the show reveals something different. A kid who is genuinely sensitive, who feels things more deeply than his exterior suggests, who has moments of empathy and insight and emotional generosity that are at complete odds with the character of the schemer and the troublemaker that everyone else has agreed to see. The episode where Bart befriends an elderly neighbor. The episodes where his relationship with Homer is shown in its full complexity. The love and the frustration and the specific grief of a boy who wants his father's admiration and cannot always find it. The episodes where Bart and Lisa's sibling relationship is shown as the genuine partnership, it is underneath the surface antagonism. 2 children in an unusual situation who have developed an unusual bond. The radiation theory raises an interesting question about Bart. If the contamination affects different residents differently, if Homer was diminished in one direction and Maggie was amplified in another, where does Bart sit? His IQ is not Homer's. He is not brilliant in the way Lisa is brilliant. But he displays a particular kind of intelligence that the show has consistently underplayed in favor of his persona as the town troublemaker. He is streetwise in the most literal sense. He understands social dynamics intuitively. He reads people, even adults, with an accuracy that exceeds what you would expect from a 10-year-old. He plans, he anticipates, he adapts when plans fail. Bart's intelligence is not the academic kind that the school is designed to recognize and reward. It is the practical kind that the school has no framework for valuing. And because it goes unrecognized, because nobody in Springfield's educational infrastructure has ever designed an environment that could engage what Bart actually has to offer, the intelligence gets channeled into the only outlet it can find: the prank, the scheme, the act of resistance that at least proves, to Bart if to nobody else, that his mind is capable of more than the institution thinks. This is also, under the coma theory, Homer's deepest anxiety about his son given form and plot. Homer knows, in whatever capacity he knows things inside the dream, that he has not always been present for Bart in the way that Bart needed him to be. That the impairment and the selfishness and the career at the plant have taken him away from his son more often than he would choose if he were choosing from clarity. Bart's rebellion in the dream might be Homer's unconscious acknowledgement of what his absence has cost. The mischievous and difficult and perpetually underestimated boy might be the shape that Homer's guilt about fatherhood takes when filtered through the dream logic of an unconscious mind. But then the same dream produces the moments of genuine connection between Homer and Bart. The times when the comedy steps back and the show shows you the love underneath it. The bowling alley, the father-son road trips, the moments when Homer finally says the right thing or does the right thing, not because he planned to, but because in the dream, as in life, love sometimes finds its way through even when the person trying to express it is significantly impaired in their ability to do so. Bart is not a bad kid. Bart is a kid with an unusual mind, in an environment that has no idea what to do with it, performing the role the environment assigned to him because it is the only role available and because it offers, at least, the satisfaction of control over something. He may be the most Springfield trapped of the Simpson children. Lisa has her ideals to fight for. Maggie has her silence to hide behind. Bart has only the performance, the prank, the persona, and the occasional episode where the show is kind enough to let you see the person underneath it. Extended meditation, the guest stars and what they reveal. The Simpsons has featured more celebrity guest appearances than any other show in television history. The list is staggering in its range and its volume. Presidents and musicians and athletes and actors and comedians and scientists and authors and newscasters and cultural figures of every conceivable variety have appeared in Springfield, playing versions of themselves or fictional characters, adding their voices to the show's enormous ongoing project of depicting the full texture of American cultural life. In the early seasons, the guest appearances were used sparingly and with specific purpose. A guest star appeared when there was something specific their real-world presence could add to the story. When Michael Jackson appeared, his appearance was built around an idea that required someone with his specific cultural weight. When Dustin Hoffman appeared, uncredited, his appearance served a genuine narrative function that could not have been achieved with a fictional character. In the later seasons, the guest appearances multiplied and the purpose became less clear. Celebrity after celebrity appeared in Springfield for reasons that the episodes did not always fully justify. The fame itself became the justification. The show wanted the guest, and the show had the reach to get the guest, and so the guest appeared. This shift has been read as a symptom of the show's decline in its later seasons, as evidence that the writers were using celebrity appearances as a substitute for the kind of storytelling that had made the show great in its earlier years. And there is truth to that reading. But under the coma theory, the shift means something different. Homer's dreaming mind, as we have discussed, absorbs fragments of the external world through the fog of unconsciousness. The television in his hospital room, the conversations happening near his bed, the radio playing in the background. The cultural flotsam of 30 years of American life drifting into a room where a man is unconscious and his brain is running on whatever signal it can still receive. As the dream progresses, as Homer's brain continues to lose the function it lost in 1993, the dream becomes less disciplined. The early post-coma seasons are still relatively coherent because the brain damage is recent and the dream has not yet fully destabilized. The reference material that the dreaming mind uses is largely internal, drawn from Homer's own memories and experiences and emotional landscape. But as time passes, as the hospital room fills with decades of ambient cultural noise, the dream begins incorporating more and more external material. Names heard on the television, voices recognized from broadcasts, Famous people whose presence in the cultural atmosphere has been strong enough and sustained enough to penetrate the fog. The dream uses them. It puts them in Springfield. It creates context for their presence that the waking mind would recognize as absurd, but that the dreaming mind accepts as simply part of the story. The proliferation of guest stars in the later seasons is, in this reading, a measure of Homer's deterioration. As his own reference material depletes, as the internal resources of his memory become less reliable, the dream draws more heavily on external input. The hospital room becomes the source rather than the enhancement. Springfield fills with people Homer has heard but not met, with voices that filtered through the unconscious rather than through lived experience, with the cultural celebrities of decades he has been sleeping through. The guest stars are not just cameos. They are the sound of the outside world reaching a sleeping man. They are what the dream sounds like when the dreamer is further from the surface and picking up different signals. And the more elaborate and improbable the celebrity appearances become, the further Homer is from waking up, the thinner the line between his internal world and the static of the world he cannot reach. Extended meditation, the treehouse of horror, and what it permits. Every year, across 36 Octobers, The Simpsons produces a Halloween special, the Treehouse of Horror episodes. Anthology collections of horror stories and parody and genuine darkness, all operating outside the show's normal continuity, all explicitly framed as non-canonical, as things that do not count, as stories told within stories that allow the show to go places it cannot normally go. In the Treehouse of Horror episodes, characters die and stay dead. Violence has consequences that are shown explicitly rather than implied. The surreal and the genuinely horrifying are given full expression rather than being softened by the show's regular comedic register. Homer gets killed, the family is destroyed. Springfield is annihilated in ways that are visually extravagant and tonally unreserved. And then the following week, everything is fine, the characters are alive, Springfield is intact, the horror has passed. This is usually explained as the non-canonical framing doing its work. Treehouse of Horror stories do not count because they are explicitly labeled as not counting. They are stories within stories, nightmares within the narrative, permitted to do what the main show cannot because everyone involved has agreed that they do not affect the main continuity. But there is another way to read the Treehouse of Horror episodes in the context of everything we have discussed tonight. They are the places where the show's unconscious becomes visible, where the things that the main continuity manages through denial and comedy and the reset button get to exist openly for 45 minutes before being safely sealed away. The horror in the Treehouse episodes is not invented. It is the show's own horror, relocated to a space where it can be expressed without consequence. The contamination that is present in every regular episode as background dread gets to be explicit in the Halloween stories. The death that the characters narrowly avoid in regular episodes and from which they always recover gets to be actual and permanent in the non-canonical space. The darkness underneath the comedy gets to be the comedy, gets to be the point for one episode a year. And then it gets sealed away. The frame closes. The main continuity reasserts itself. Everything is fine again. This is exactly how Springfield manages everything else. The Treehouse of Horror is just a more visible and formalized version of the same mechanism. The dangerous thing is acknowledged, given space, expressed fully, and then sealed into a container that prevents it from contaminating the main story. The container is labeled non-canonical, the way the real version of Seymour Skinner is labeled an illegal topic of conversation, the way the truth about the plant is labeled a thing that nobody in Springfield can quite see clearly enough to name. The horror exists. The show knows it exists. Every year it is brought out and given its moment and then carefully put back, because the show also knows that the horror cannot live in the main continuity without destroying the comedy. And the comedy is what holds everything together. The comedy is the thing that makes it possible to keep watching, to keep showing up, to return every Sunday to a family and a town and a story that contains dark truths it has agreed not to look at directly. The Treehouse of Horror episodes are Springfield's annual confession, followed immediately by 39 weeks of continuing to live as though the confession was never made. Extended meditation, Springfield as America's unconscious. There is a way of thinking about Springfield that goes beyond the individual theories we have explored tonight, a frame that contains all of them while also containing something larger. Springfield, in this frame, is not just a fictional town with dark secrets. Springfield is the American unconscious made visible. It is the part of the national psyche that knows things it will not say, that has seen things it has decided not to see, that carries contradictions it has agreed to live with, because the alternative is too uncomfortable to contemplate. America has its own version of Springfield's collective denial, the refusal to acknowledge things that are plainly visible, the institutional structures that protect themselves by making certain truths inadmissible, the way a community can look at something happening in its midst and choose, through a process that does not require explicit coordination, to not see it. The way a town can know something without knowing it, can carry information that everyone possesses and nobody articulates. Burns is every powerful institution that has ever externalized its costs onto the people who depend on it while maintaining the fiction that it serves their interests. Homer is every worker who keeps showing up to a job that diminishes him because the alternative is worse. Marge is every person who holds the house together through sheer force of sustained attention while the larger world churns around her. Lisa is every voice that has ever said something true and been answered with a polite form of silence. Maggie is every potential that the system has not yet found a way to suppress. And Springfield itself, the town that resets, the town that forgets, the town that votes to maintain the lie, is every community that has ever looked at its own reality and chosen the comfortable version of events over the accurate one. The show has been holding this mirror up since 1989, and the image in the mirror has only become more recognizable as the years have passed. The nuclear plant has gotten larger in the landscape of American life, metaphorically speaking, as the conversation about corporate power and environmental contamination and institutional corruption has moved from the margins into the center of how Americans understand their situation. The Burns figure has become more familiar, not less. The Homer figure has become more recognizable as a portrait of what economic anxiety and cognitive overwhelm do to the relationship between a person and their own life. Springfield is not ahead of its time. It has always been of its time. It has always been depicting exactly the moment in which it is being watched, because the moment in which it is being watched has always contained the same fundamental tensions: power and those subject to it, truth and those who manage it, comfort and the cost of maintaining comfort, love and the weight of everything that love has to survive. The show puts all of this into a yellow house on Evergreen Terrace, gives it the shape of a family sitcom, wraps it in couch gags and celebrity cameos and jokes about donuts, and delivers it to you every Sunday night. And you laugh, and you feel something underneath the laughter that you cannot quite name, and you come back next week. Because that is what it is like to live in Springfield. To carry the truth in the same hand you use to wave at the neighbors. To know what you know and keep showing up anyway. To love the town even as you see it clearly. To never quite be able to leave. That is what America is like for many of its residents. And The Simpsons has been telling you this in the gentlest possible way, through the softest possible medium, for 36 years. You just have to know how to watch it. Extended meditation, Grandpa Simpson, and the weight of complicity. There is a character in The Simpsons who does not get nearly enough attention in the context of the dark truths this show has been accumulating across its run. He lives in the Springfield retirement castle, a facility that was itself damaged by burns when the oil sinkhole collapsed beneath it. He is old. He is frequently confused. He tells long, wandering stories that begin in one era and end somewhere else entirely, stories that the people he tells them to endure with varying degrees of patience. He is funny in the specific way that very old and very lost people are funny, with the unfiltered quality of someone who has mostly stopped monitoring what they say. His name is Abraham Simpson. And he is one of the most morally compromised characters in the entire show, if you read what the show has established about him carefully. Abe Simpson was married to Mona. Mona became a fugitive when Burns identified her to the FBI. Abe's response to this was not to fight the situation, or to find a way to maintain connection with his wife, or to tell his son the truth about what had happened. His response was to show Homer a fake grave, to tell his son that his mother was dead, and to maintain that lie for the entirety of Homer's childhood, adolescence, and most of his adult life. 27 years. Abe chose, 27 years ago, to build his son's understanding of his own life on a lie. He chose it not out of cruelty, but out of what he probably understood at the time as practicality. A fugitive wife is a complication. Explaining to a young child why his mother is gone and cannot come back is difficult. The lie is simpler. The grave is easier. It closes the question in a way that the truth does not. But the lie did not close the question. It opened a wound and kept it open for 27 years without letting Homer know it was there. It created the foundational damage of Homer's psychological makeup, the desperate need for approval, the terror of abandonment, the coping mechanisms that make him the person he is, and it did this without Homer's knowledge or consent. Homer lived inside the wound for 27 years. He developed around it. He became the person the wound shaped him into. And none of that was his choice, because none of it was his knowledge. Abe also made the deal with Burns. We discussed this in the section on Mona, but it deserves a separate look here. Abe discovered something that Burns had done, something that gave Abe a measure of leverage over the most powerful man in Springfield. And the thing he chose to do with that leverage was not to expose Burns, or to hold him accountable, or to use it in service of anything larger than his own family's immediate security. He traded it for Homer's job. This is understandable. It is the choice a parent makes when the alternatives are abstract, and the concrete benefit to their child is immediate. Homer will have a job at the plant. Homer will be secure. Homer will not be fired regardless of what he does. In exchange, Burns gets something he needed, Abe's silence about whatever he had discovered. The deal is made. The silence is maintained. But consider what this deal actually meant in terms of the larger picture. By trading his leverage over Burns for Homer's job security, Abe ensured that Homer would spend his career inside the facility that Burns operates, inside the contamination zone, working for the man who had destroyed his family. Spending his adult life in the plant that was degrading his cognitive function and shaping him into exactly the kind of compliant, incurious employee that the plant needed. Abe protected Homer's job and simultaneously ensured that Homer would spend his life in the most damaging possible place for him to spend it. The deal that was supposed to keep Homer safe kept Homer in Burns's grip. And Abe never told Homer what the deal was, or what it had cost, or what it had purchased, because telling Homer would have meant telling Homer everything else, and telling Homer everything else would have meant Abe having to account for 27 years of silence about his mother. The complicity goes deep. Abe is not a villain. He is an old man who made choices under pressure a long time ago, and who has been living with those choices for decades without being able to acknowledge them. He tells his stories. He sits in the retirement castle. He watches the television, and the weight of what he knows and has never said presses on him in ways that the show depicts as confusion and lost time and the general fog of age. But that might be, underneath all of it, the specific fog of guilt. Grandpa Simpson is the character who knows the most about the true architecture of the Simpson family's situation. He knows about Mona. He knows about the deal. He knows what Burns is and what Burns has done. And he has held all of this knowledge inside a comedy of senility and misdirection for the entirety of the show's run, telling stories that seem to go nowhere because the story he cannot tell is the one that would explain everything. The show has let him die in several non-canonical contexts. It has depicted his age and his frailty with genuine affection and genuine sadness. It has given him moments of unexpected clarity that suggest the confusion is not as complete as it appears. And it has never, across 36 seasons, had him fully account for what he knew and when he knew it. That accounting will never come. The show will not provide it. But the shape of it is visible, if you know where to look, in the gaps between his stories, in the moments when he almost says something and then redirects, in the specific silences that a very old man keeps about a very old time. Extended meditation. The economy of Springfield and its single point of failure. The Springfield economy is, when you examine it carefully, one of the most precarious in the history of fictional municipalities. Its entire productive base flows from a single source, the nuclear power plant. Burns's facility employs a significant portion of the town's adult workers directly. It provides the electricity that every business and household depends on. It is the economic gravitational center around which everything else in Springfield orbits. Remove the plant, and the economy of Springfield collapses. Not declines, collapses. There is no secondary economic engine that could absorb the impact. This is not an accident of the show's design. It is a deliberate and specific choice that reflects something real about the relationship between single industry towns and the corporations that dominate them. The show is not depicting Springfield's economic dependence on the plant as an unfortunate quirk of local history. It is depicting it as the mechanism through which Burns maintains his control over the entire community. You do not need to threaten people directly when you control the thing they cannot live without. You do not need to issue ultimatums or make examples when the alternative to your continued operation is so obviously catastrophic that everyone in town understands it without being told. The threat is implicit in the structure. The dependence is the coercion. This is why Springfield cannot challenge Burns in any sustained or effective way. Any genuine challenge to Burns's operation would require the residents of Springfield to be willing to accept the economic consequences of that challenge, which would be the shutdown of the town's primary employer and the loss of the electricity supply. No community can sustain that kind of economic shock while simultaneously organizing and fighting. The fight requires resources. The resources depend on the economy. The economy depends on Burns. Burns has arranged his own indispensability. The show has depicted Springfield's attempted resistance to Burns across many episodes, and the pattern is always the same. The resistance builds momentum, reaches a point where it seems like something might actually change, and then something intervenes. Someone discovers that challenging Burns too effectively is also challenging their own livelihood, their neighbor's livelihood, the economic stability of the community they live in. The resistance falters. Burns survives. The plant keeps operating. This is not Springfield being cowardly or stupid. It is Springfield being rational in the specific and constrained way that a community with no economic alternatives can be rational. When the only alternative to your oppressor is economic catastrophe, you develop a very sophisticated relationship with toleration. You find the line where resistance costs too much, and you stay on the other side of it. You grumble and you organize up to a point, and then you let it go. Because the point where you would have to stop letting it go is the point where the plant closes, and the plant closing is worse than whatever Burns is doing today. Burns understands this perfectly. This is why he has never worried about the contamination being addressed in any meaningful way. The contamination is the evidence of the violations. Addressing the violations would require shutting down the plant, at least temporarily. Shutting down the plant would destroy the town's economy. The town knows this. The residents know this. And so the contamination continues, not because anyone has decided that contamination is acceptable, but because the economic structure that Burns constructed makes any alternative to the contamination feel like a cure worse than the disease. This is the final and most sophisticated layer of what Burns has built. He has constructed a situation where the people most harmed by his facility are also the people most economically dependent on it, and where any action they might take to address the harm would require them to accept a degree of economic disruption that their economic position makes unacceptable. He has made their own dependence the walls of their cage. And the yellow skin and the mutated biology and the cognitive impairment are not just collateral damage of this arrangement, they are its maintenance. A population healthy enough to think clearly and plan effectively and sustain organized resistance over a long enough period to actually change things would be a different kind of threat than the one Burns currently manages. The contamination keeps the threat at a manageable level. It keeps the resistance below the threshold where it might succeed. Springfield cannot challenge Burns because Springfield needs Burns. Springfield needs Burns because Burns arranged it that way. And Springfield will need Burns for as long as the plant keeps running and the contamination keeps doing what the contamination does. That is the architecture. That is the system. And it has been running without significant interruption since the very first episode of the show. Extended meditation. The children will inherit Springfield. One final thought before we reach the end of tonight. A thought about what happens to the children. Bart Simpson, Lisa Simpson, Maggie Simpson. 3 children growing up in a contaminated environment, in a family broken by forces they did not choose and cannot fully understand, in a town that has perfected the art of forgetting. What do they become? The show has occasionally tried to answer this question, in flash forwards and future episodes and special events where the floating timeline is briefly suspended and we are allowed to see versions of these characters as adults. The results, when they come, are always emotionally rich and always immediately withdrawn. The future is shown and then sealed away. The characters return to their original ages. The present reasserts itself. But the glimpses tell us something. Lisa as an adult is who she has always been. More fully realized, more burdened by the weight of what she has tried to do and partially failed to do, but recognizably herself. Still fighting. Still principled. Still searching for connection in a world that finds her difficult to accommodate. Bart's future, in the episodes that have depicted it, is more uncertain, more marked by the roads not taken and the potential that the environment of Springfield did not quite allow him to develop. And Maggie's future is the one that remains most completely unwritten, the great open question, the potential that the show has been carefully not resolving for 36 years. What would happen if these children were allowed to grow up? If the floating timeline lifted and time were permitted to move? If Springfield aged? If the children became adults? If the house on Evergreen Terrace became a place their parents used to live in rather than a place where everything is always the same? The show cannot answer this. It is not structured to answer it. The answer would end the show, and the show does not end. The show resets. The show continues. The show finds its way back to the couch on Sunday night, every Sunday night, through whatever has happened in between. But the question lingers. What do children become when they grow up in Springfield? What are the consequences, on a generational scale, of living inside the contamination zone? The radiation theory suggests biological consequences. The coma theory suggests they are frozen in their father's dream. The collective denial theory suggests they have absorbed the town's unspoken social contract and will carry it forward, forgetting what needs to be forgotten and voting to maintain whatever fiction makes the present bearable. And maybe the answer is all three. Maybe the children of Springfield are all of these things at once. Biologically altered, dreamlike, and preserved, complicit in the collective agreement that keeps the system running. And yet, somehow, underneath all of it, themselves, recognizable, lovable, flawed and genuine, and carrying, in their different ways, the same love that the family has always been built on. Because whatever Springfield has done to the Simpsons, it has not taken that. The love is still there. Homer and Marge's imperfect, durable, frequently tested love. The love between parents and children that expresses itself as strangling and saxophone solos and Friday night family dinners and the specific way a house feels when everyone who belongs in it is inside it. That is what the contamination has not been able to reach. That is what the coma preserves. That is what the collective denial cannot touch. The love at the center of this family, messy and exhausting and completely genuine, is the thing that makes Springfield worth visiting. It is the thing that makes the dark truths bearable. It is the thing that has kept people coming back for 36 years. The fish have 3 eyes. The plant is cracked. The billionaire is immortal. The principal is an imposter. The baby is a genius. Nobody ages. Everything resets. And the family is still there, on the couch, in the house, in the town, in the dream, in the contamination zone, in the American unconscious, in whatever Springfield is or has ever been. Still there, still loving each other, still impossible to leave behind. Because that is the thing about Springfield that no theory can fully account for, not the radiation theory or the coma theory or the denial theory or any of the others. All of the theories are trying to explain why the town is the way it is, why the people are the way they are, why the rules of reality work differently here than they work anywhere else. They are trying to find the mechanism, the cause, the system, the source. And they are right to try. The mechanism is there. The cause is real. The system has been running for 36 years and it shows no signs of stopping. But underneath the mechanism, underneath the contamination and the dream and the denial and the immortal billionaire and the silent genius baby and the town that votes to forget, underneath all of it, there is something the theories cannot touch. Something that persists not because the system generates it, but because the people carry it. Something that the radiation did not take and the coma did not lose and Burns's century of careful engineering did not manage to engineer away. The love. The specific, stubborn, imperfect, unkillable love of this particular family, in this particular house, in this particular impossible town. Homer and Marge. Bart and Lisa and Maggie. Evergreen Terrace. The couch, the television, the yellow light from the kitchen window when dinner is almost ready. All of the dark truths are real. And underneath them, also real, also always real. The thing that makes the dark truths bearable and the impossible town livable, and the contamination zone survivable, and the coma dream worth dreaming. The family, still there. That is what this show is. That is what it has always been, and that is why it will never end. Extended meditation, 36 years, and what they mean. We should sit with the number for a moment before we reach the end. 36 years. That is how long The Simpsons has been on the air. 36 years is longer than many of the people watching this video have been alive. It is long enough that there are adults in their 30s who grew up watching this show, who watched it as children when Homer was middle-aged, and who are now approximately as old as Homer was when the show began, while Homer himself remains exactly as he was. 36 years of watching a family that does not age from the outside while you age on your side of the screen. This creates a specific and strange relationship between the audience and the show. The usual dynamic of long-running television is that you grow up alongside the characters, or the characters grow older as you do, or at least there is some sense of shared temporality, of moving through the same time together. The Simpsons does not offer this. The Simpsons offers its audience the increasingly strange experience of having aged past the characters, of being older now than the parents were when you first met them as a child, of being in a position where you understand Homer and Marge's problems from the inside in a way you could not when you were 8 years old watching them from the outside. You know what it is like to work a job that diminishes you. You know what it is like to try to be a good parent when your own resources are limited. You know what it is like to love someone imperfectly, to try and fail and try again. You know what it is like to live in a community that is shaped by forces you did not choose and cannot fully change. You know what it is like to carry the weight of the gap between what you hoped for and what is. And now when you watch Homer failing at his job or struggling in his marriage, or surviving something that should have killed him, you are not watching from the outside. You are recognizing yourself. The show that was funny because it was exaggerated when you were a child is funny now for a different reason. It is funny because it is accurate, because the exaggeration turns out to have been, all along, a very precise description of what adult life in modest circumstances actually feels like from the inside. This is the gift the floating timeline gives the audience that it cannot give the characters. The characters do not age, the audience does. And as the audience ages, the show they are watching changes. Not because the show changes, but because the viewers bring more to it. The jokes that were funny because Homer is impaired are now also funny because Homer is you. The situations that were funny because they were extreme are now also funny because they are familiar. The show has been aging its audience for 36 years while keeping its characters perfectly preserved. It has been creating a situation where the people watching grow increasingly capable of understanding what they are watching, while the people being watched stay exactly as they were when the watching began. And this is why the show will not end voluntarily. It is not just about ratings or revenue, though those matter. It is about what ending would mean for the audience. Ending The Simpsons would mean acknowledging that the family has reached the end of their story, that the time has come to stop returning to Evergreen Terrace, that the television in the living room of the house where you grew up will no longer find this family when you turn it on. It would mean a goodbye that the audience has been quietly, sustainedly, successfully avoiding for 36 years. The show has survived critical consensus that its best years were behind it, survived that consensus for 20 years, and kept producing episodes that people watched and argued about and cared enough about to write thousands of words of theory and analysis. It has survived being declared dead as a creative entity and kept breathing because the audience keeps it alive. Every viewer who sits down on a quiet night or queues up an old episode when they cannot sleep keeps the promise alive. The promise that Springfield is still there, that the family is still on the couch, that the house on Evergreen Terrace has not changed and will not change and will be there the next time you need it. And someday it will end. Every show ends. When that day comes for The Simpsons, it will be one of the genuinely significant moments in the history of American popular culture. Not because of what the show is as television, though it is remarkable television, but because of what it has been for the people who grew up with it. It will be the end of something that has been there their entire lives. Something they did not choose to begin and cannot choose to continue. And then probably they will watch a rerun, because Springfield will still be there. It will always be there. The episodes do not disappear when the show ends. The family on Evergreen Terrace will still be on that couch, still exactly the ages they were, still going through the same things in the same house in the same impossible town. You can always go back. That is what reruns are for. That is what streaming is for. Not to watch again only in the hope of finding something new, though you always find something new, but to return. To press play on an episode you have seen 100 times, and let the theme song play and let the couch gag happen, and let Springfield assemble itself around you again, exactly as it was, exactly as it will be, exactly as it has always been. Home. Extended meditation, the show that watches back. There is a phenomenon that happens when you spend enough time with any piece of art. The relationship inverts. You start out watching it, observing it from outside, bringing your interpretations to it, and taking what you find. And then, gradually, almost without noticing when it happens, the thing starts watching you back. It starts telling you things about yourself that you did not bring to it. It starts asking questions that you did not know you were there to answer. The art stops being a thing you look at and becomes a mirror you look into. The Simpsons has been doing this for 36 years. Millions of people have sat down in front of this show and watched it, and laughed at it and carried it with them. And the show, across all of those years and all of those episodes and all of those dark truths it has been quietly accumulating, has been watching them back, noting what makes them laugh, noting what makes them uncomfortable, noting what they will accept and what they will reject, and where the line between the tolerable and the intolerable sits for a given audience in a given moment. And what the show has found, across 36 years of this mutual observation, is that the line moves. That what was too dark in 1990 was acceptable by 1995 and unremarkable by 2000. That the audience's capacity to receive difficult truths through the vehicle of comedy expanded as the culture changed, and as the show's relationship with its audience deepened. That what began as a fairly conventional family sitcom in an unconventional animated form gradually became something more complex and more demanding, not because the show changed its fundamental nature, but because the audience grew into the show's ambitions. The theories we have discussed tonight, the radiation and the coma and the shooting and the immortality and the denial and the silence and the predictions and the geography, these are not things the show hid from its audience. They are things the show placed in plain sight and trusted the audience to find when the audience was ready to find them. The evidence has always been there. The patterns have always been visible. The dark truths have always been present, embedded in the episodes, distributed across the decades, waiting. What changed was the audience. What changed was the internet, which gave people who had always seen these patterns a place to share them and compare them and build them into the elaborate and internally consistent theoretical structures that have been circulating online for 20 years. What changed was the accumulation of enough seasons that the patterns became undeniable, that the evidence reached a mass that required interpretation rather than dismissal. The show watched its audience find its secrets, and the show responded, occasionally, by acknowledging the finding without confirming it. The fake coma scene, the alternate Smithers ending, the episodes that reference the theories without resolving them. The show participates in the conversation about its own mysteries in the specific way that something very old and very intelligent participates in conversations about itself, with gestures that mean many things, with acknowledgments that are not quite confirmations, with winks that are simultaneously an invitation to look more carefully and a reminder that looking more carefully is something you are doing, not something the show is doing for you. Because the show does not owe you its secrets. The show has put them in front of you for 36 years. Finding them is your responsibility. Understanding them is your work. And what you do with them, how you watch the show differently or the same as before, what you carry away from a night spent in the darker corners of Springfield, that is entirely and completely yours. The show watches back. It always has. And what it has seen across all these years and all these viewers and all these episodes is a culture that keeps returning to the same questions about power and those who are subject to it, about truth and those who manage it, about the gap between the life you imagined and the life you are living, about what it costs to love people, really love them, imperfectly and completely and without reservation, in a world that is not designed to make that easy. Springfield is where the show keeps those questions alive, where they circle around every episode, wearing different costumes, inhabiting different plots, finding new comedy in the same foundational concerns. The show does not resolve the questions. It returns to them. It makes them available again. It keeps them fresh and present and worth asking, and you keep coming back to ask them. On Sunday nights, and on quiet weekday evenings, and on nights when you cannot sleep and you need something that feels like home, even if home in this case is a contaminated fictional town run by an immortal billionaire where nobody ages and the fish have too many eyes. Even then, you come back, Springfield waits, it always does. That is what Springfield is, that is what it has always been. Not a contamination zone, not a coma dream, not a cover-up, not a prediction engine. All of those things, yes. But underneath all of them, in the space where the theories end and the feeling begins, it is a place we made because we needed somewhere to go that would always be there when we arrived. A town that never changes. A family that always waits. A show that never ends. And all of the theories we have explored tonight, when you hold them together and look at them as a single body of evidence rather than as individual arguments, they are all saying the same thing in different languages. They are all trying to articulate the feeling the show produces in people who love it most. The feeling that something real is happening here. Something that exceeds what a comedy about a cartoon family should be capable of producing. Something that requires explanation, or at least requires the acknowledgement that it is there. The radiation theory says the harm has been visible all along, in the skin and the eyes and the fish and the cracked towers, if you knew how to look at it. The coma theory says what you are watching is the dream of a man who loved his family so completely that even unconscious and dying, he refused to stop telling stories about them. The Burns theory says, what you are watching is the logical conclusion of unchecked power maintained over a very long time. A single man with enough resources making himself indispensable to the community his facility is destroying. The shooting theory says, official answers are not always true answers. And the difference between closing a case and solving it is the difference between convenience and justice. The principal and the pauper says, communities protect themselves through what they agree not to see, and forgetting is a decision, maintained through social pressure and the exile of those who insist otherwise. The Maggie theory says, the most dangerous intelligence in Springfield is the one nobody is watching for, patient enough to wait for exactly the right moment. The Mona theory says, the damage done to one family by one powerful man's grudge ripples through 3 generations, and the ripples have not stopped. The floating timeline says, we built the loop. We pressed pause in 1989. We did it out of love, and the love is real, and the loop is the shape love takes when it refuses to accept the alternative. All of these theories, all of these dark truths, all of these hours in Springfield, they all come down to the same thing at the bottom. Somebody made something true, and the truth has been finding its way to the surface for 36 years, and it will keep finding its way to the surface for as long as people are willing to sit with it and look. The Simpsons is great not because it is funny, though it is funny. It is great because it is true. And now that you can see what it has been building all along, you can never quite watch it the same way again. And it is still funny, and it is still beautiful, and it is still home. Because some things, if you love them enough, can last as long as you need them to. Thank you for spending these hours in Springfield tonight. If you found yourself somewhere between awake and dreaming through any of it, that feels like exactly the right way to have done it. There is no wrong way to visit Springfield. You can come in through the front door, or through a theory, or through a memory of a Sunday night a long time ago when you were young, and the couch you were sitting on still existed, and everyone who was supposed to be home was home. All of those are valid entrances. All of them lead to the same place. Leave a comment when you wake up if you like. Tell us what time it is where you are. Tell us where in the world you are watching from. It is always worth knowing what corners of the world are awake with Springfield tonight. And if you want more nights like this one, subscribe and we will have another one waiting for you. Springfield will be here when you come back. It always is. That is the whole point. Good night.